One of the strongest fighters in the world finally reaches the top, but on that same day he dies in a ridiculous way. And just when everything seemed over, a fairy appears, giving him a second chance in another world as a hero. But something goes completely wrong because instead of being reborn among heroes, he ends up in the middle of demon territory, surrounded by creatures that should be his enemies. With no one he can trust, he realizes he can't just fight, so he starts playing a much more dangerous game, infiltrating, manipulating, and rising within the enemy's own army. And the further he goes, the more he realizes that this world isn't as simple as it seems. And without further ado, let's get into the video. While some slaves were working, a small monster was ordering all of them to hurry up more and more, using a golden whip that could shatter shoulders. A young man who was carrying the small monster says that drops of blood and sweat formed all over his body, and that such a long life as a slave was extremely exhausting. The man who had once conquered the title of champion at 27 years old, who held the position of the best fighter in the world for 2 years, with a total record of 23 wins and 0 losses, the heavyweight champion of the largest MMA league in the world, ended his final title defense match and retired undefeated. Choi Hyun-seok is our protagonist. Someone like him, right after retiring, faced a surprise that no one would expect. A truck, completely out of nowhere, hit him. He was completely devastated because all the money he had saved for a comfortable retirement was now meaningless. In addition, he questioned how difficult his life had been up to that point. The protagonist ended up dying after fighting until the very end, only to die in vain. 30 minutes later, he began to come to terms with it, thinking that it might be for the best, since he was already dead and no longer needed to train or defend his titles. And since he no longer had family or friends to mourn him, the only good thing was that no one would be sad. But as soon as he looked ahead, he noticed something strange. A person began to emerge from a portal. That angel apologized, saying she was a bit late, and called the protagonist an SSS-ranked hero, Mr. Choi Hyun-seok. She introduced herself, saying her name was Raquel. Furthermore, she was a talent hunter who scouts people whose life expectancy has ended on Earth. He became enchanted by her beauty and approached, asking if she could explain in more detail. Raquel said that was no problem and explained that he had 2 choices. The first was to accept death as it is and wait for his next reincarnation as a pitiful old bachelor. The second option was to be resurrected as a hero and save another world that was waiting for him. Seok became a bit confused, saying everything was too sudden and that he needed time to think, as the explanation also seemed insufficient. But the angel Raquel approached him, asking how he could want to think when such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity had appeared. She added that if he simply listened to her, he would surely obtain wealth, honor, beautiful women, and special privileges. Heroes who become heroes now also receive a status window as a special privilege, allowing them to become strong like game characters. In addition, they offer all kinds of incredible services. However, the protagonist began to think about it, since becoming a hero basically meant fighting again, and he had just retired, and now they wanted him to go back to fighting. So he preferred to die in peace and reincarnate in the future. Raquel became a little irritated and told him to pay close attention, since it seemed he had not understood. So she would explain everything again. She began to give context, saying that if he became a hero in the other world, as soon as he started, the chief of a rural village would come running barefoot to offer him food. The hero would feel pity and wonderfully resolve the chief's humble situation. Then the emotional chief would say that his daughter was the most beautiful woman in the village. And if the hero accepted his unworthy daughter as his own, this humble father could not be happier. However, the protagonist still showed no reaction, making her even more indignant because at that rate her headhunter bonus would be lost. Therefore, she had no choice but to use another method. She turned around, saying that if he truly did not like it, that was fine, and it seemed she could assume he was not interested, so she would be on her way. The protagonist asked her to wait a minute, but she continued, saying that now he could end that life as a lonely old man and try harder in the next life, although there was no guarantee he would reincarnate as a human. This made Seok startled. He grabbed her leg and ended up agreeing, saying he would do whatever she asked. But Raquel said she could not quite hear what he was trying to say. Frightened by the possibility of not returning as a human, he continued clinging to her leg while shouting that he accepted everything about that hero deal. With a smile on her face, she asked if they could start immediately. He became a bit confused since he had not received any explanation about the other world. She said they would start immediately anyway, since there was no reason to wait. A wonderful world was waiting for him. The protagonist tried to stop her, asking her to wait because she could not just send someone without any preparation, but it was useless. She continued what she was doing and told him to have a wonderful life of adventure. She thought he would leave anyway, so why was he agonizing so much? While carrying out her work, she received a call and said that for aspiring hero number 137,421, Choi Hyun-seok, as requested. He had just been safely transported and the bonus should be sent immediately. Sometime later, lying on a bed, the protagonist began to wake up and noticed a vaguely familiar voice, wondering if that was the village chief Raquel had mentioned. He also thought that the development was very obvious at the beginning, but suddenly he received a very strong blow to his stomach, with someone saying they would crush him if he did not get up. The protagonist got up irritated, asking who the idiot was who wanted to die so early, but as soon as he looked at the person who hit him, he was surprised. An extremely terrifying warrior was asking why he was sleeping in the slave quarters, since he was nothing more than a slave. Seok became confused, wondering if he was the chief with the incomparably beautiful daughter, or perhaps a monster that needed to be defeated. Without understanding exactly what was going on, the protagonist introduced himself as a hero, but the warrior in front of him asked what hero he was talking about and stepped closer, saying that heroes these days seemed stupid. Seok thought something was wrong, but he refused to believe that that beautiful angel would do this to him. So perhaps the man in front of him was his tutorial mission. He began to panic, wondering if things would really be like this, but tried to calm himself as he needed to figure out exactly what was happening. So that was the only action he could take at the moment. The warrior asked what he was doing, and Seok simply attacked him, telling him to go straight to the other side of life. But the warrior took the attack, which basically caused no damage, and asked if the protagonist had not clearly said he was a hero, but he was already getting tired of so much nonsense and questioned where so many lunatics were coming from. The warrior began to squeeze the protagonist's leg, who felt intense pain in his ankle. The warrior prepared to attack him, saying he would return to normal after a good night's sleep. With that single attack, the protagonist completely fainted and was taken to the dungeon. As soon as he woke up, he began banging on the door while shouting for them to open it, because he wanted to fight the cow-headed guy again. Suddenly, the door opened and the small monster asked who was crying like a baby. He told the protagonist that if he kept shouting like that, he would be boiled whole and turned into pork. Frightened, Seok said he would stay quiet, but the guard told him to stay alert because he was being watched. He realized that the wonderful adventure in another world was nothing like what Raquel had described, which made him question where everything had gone wrong. If things continued like that, he would die twice a virgin, much less marry the chief's daughter. Suddenly, he heard a voice asking if he was the newcomer. Seok was startled and asked who was speaking. The man said he was the senior hero of that place and explained that it was the fortress of the Demon King's army where human slaves were used. The protagonist, still trying to understand the situation, asked his senior what was going on and why they had been placed in such a place from the beginning. The senior asked if he really wanted to know the answer. Suddenly, he began shouting, asking the other heroes who had been sent if they were still alive, saying that a true hero had come to save everyone. Suddenly, many people began shouting for help, saying they were heroes as well. The protagonist became even more confused, wondering what was going on and why everyone was a hero. The man told the protagonist that it was exactly what he had just seen, emphasizing that more than 100 heroes had been thrown to the Demon King's army fortress. In addition, the red-haired, cow-headed guy the protagonist had seen earlier was called Radrun and was the commander of that place, and the smaller monster was known as Zack, famous for being cruel. Moreover, the protagonist had already caught his attention, so there was no longer any need to be so cautious. The man continued explaining and said that they were in that situation because of a wicked demon named Raquel. That's right, if that damned demon had not sent them to the wrong place, none of this would be happening. The protagonist asked what he meant by being sent to the wrong place, and if that meant they were not supposed to start there. The older hero said that was correct, since heroes captured from other places had told him. According to those stories, there was a separate starting zone for heroes, and most of them began in bustling cities or rural villages. Normally, heroes did not have much power and lived normal lives. However, they did not start their hero lives in the middle of the Demon King's army. After some explanations, the protagonist began to understand that the reason he ended up there was because of that damned Raquel. In the third corps of the Demon King's army, in the second slave unit, several people were working while the protagonist shouted that they were the great Demon King's army and therefore needed to defeat humans and devour them. Zack announced that the work for that day was finished and ordered everyone to return immediately to their cells. The protagonist, who was holding a log, swore to himself that one day he would exterminate all the goblins in that place. Shortly after, he was imprisoned back in his cell and threw himself on the ground completely exhausted. He remarked that the prison was even a bit more comfortable, however. He remembered that that sly angel had mentioned something about hero privileges, and due to everything he had suffered, he had forgotten about it. If he said hero, he would receive a status window and bonuses. Normally, in situations like that, the correct phrase to say was status window appear. Indeed, a window appeared in front of him showing his ranking, strength, agility, stamina, and magic, in addition to possessing the combat instinct skill. Looking at the system screen, he began to question whether those numbers were really his stats, since he did not know what combat instinct or even stamina was. The older hero was surprised to see that his endurance was already 31. The protagonist confirmed and said that his strength was probably 28. The older hero said he had heard that he was a champion, and now he could see it was true, which showed he was indeed different, since having stats above 30 at level 1 was surprising. However, this conversation did not excite the protagonist at all. He said that even with all those stats the older hero was talking about, he was still nothing more than a slave. However, the older hero said he was mistaken, and emphasized that the protagonist could definitely escape that place and become a real hero. Seok covered his ears, saying that guy was doing it again, but the older hero continued, saying that normally people only begin to develop their combat instinct skills, but in the protagonist's case, that was unusual. Seok remained unmotivated and simply said goodnight to his companion, thinking that even if everything he said was true, at that rate, he would remain level 1. So how could he escape? As soon as the older hero fell asleep, the protagonist got up, saying he was finally alone, and looked again at his system screen since he wanted to make sure of what he had seen and check it a second time. While observing it, he thought that there were 2 points that seemed promising: magic, which allowed the exertion of superhuman strength, and hero points of unknown origin. Even false heroes did not know about these hero points. When he had asked the other heroes, none of them had ever obtained those points. Suddenly, a bright light began to emerge from the screen, frightening the protagonist. Raquel appeared, saying it had been quite a while and asking if he wanted to know more about hero points. She explained that those points were an important resource for the convenience of heroes, and that they could mainly be obtained through missions and usage methods. But the truth was that the protagonist was not interested in that at all. He grabbed Raquel and began squeezing her, saying that the discussion about hero points could wait, since first they needed to start with a good beating. A few minutes later, she was tied up and saying she was sorry because she had not imagined that spilling some coffee while having a snack would break the magic circuit. He asked if the punishment he received was to become her employee, but she said no, as she was more like a dedicated fairy there to help him until he managed to defeat the Demon King. The protagonist lay down again and told her that unfortunately being a hero was already over. Raquel became confused and asked what he meant by that. Seok explained that he had no intention whatsoever of defeating the Demon King, asking if he could not simply live a normal life there. She explained that many people could become heroes, however, he had SSS level potential. But the protagonist said that was not a good enough reason for him to start moving forward since he had never had that kind of sense of duty. She tried to argue back, but the protagonist interrupted, saying he did not want to live fighting like before and wished her goodnight. Raquel became a bit confused, wondering if that boy had always been like that because as far as she remembered, he was an idiot who loved fighting and women, but now she did not know what to do. Not long ago, Raquel had been completely irritated, asking her superior if she really wanted her to become the protagonist's dedicated fairy, because even if she had made a mistake, being a dedicated fairy was too much for someone of her seniority. Moreover, the mission she received was not to return until the protagonist had defeated the Demon King. The higher being told Raquel that there was no turning back. A dedicated fairy was like a slave-like existence to a hero, so she must actively cooperate with him and share life and death with the hero. The entity told her to go, as she would be sent directly to the Demon King's army fortress where the protagonist was. She was surprised upon hearing that, but the entity told her not to return until she had fulfilled her duties. She tried to refuse but was simply sent to him. Back in the present, Seok asked if, as a dedicated fairy, she must absolutely obey the hero's words, because if that was true, she should help with the escape plan. Suddenly, he heard someone knocking on the door and quickly grabbed Raquel. Zack opened the cell door and told the protagonist to get up. She said he did not need to do that because she could use invisibility magic. Seok found that a bit suspicious because the roll call had already ended, so why was that short goblin there calling him? Zack explained that Commander Raidrun was calling for the protagonist. A few minutes later, inside the commander's office, Raidrun said he had recently heard that the protagonist had been working very hard. Zack had said all that because he had chosen an excellent mount. Seok was surprised to see that the stinky goblin had given him praise. The commander continued, saying that at first he thought the protagonist was crazy, but it was good to see that he had worked hard, and because of that, he would like to know if Seok was interested in becoming a slave master. The protagonist did not expect that, but the commander continued explaining that nowadays work efficiency had been decreasing a lot. Raquel became alarmed, asking if the protagonist was really thinking about accepting that. Irritated by the situation, she shouted, asking where in the world there was a hero who did heavy labor for the Demon King's army. Both Zack and Raidrun heard this and asked what he had just said. To avoid a confrontation, the protagonist bowed and thanked them, accepting the job offer, and emphasized that he would do his best to make all humans kneel. Raidrun explained that, contrary to his first impression, he had begun to like the protagonist, and if he continued doing such excellent work, he himself, as commander, would formally request for him to join the Demon King's army. With everything explained, the commander told him to come in, but the protagonist could only cry because his escape route had ended. Sometime later, while all the other humans were working, the protagonist mocked them all, saying that even his grandmother moved faster than that and asking if they would be able to meet the quota for the day. Because of this, the system began giving him some rewards, saying he was ascending through countless people. He thought that was an excellent deal and began shouting in celebration. The people around him began to think he had gone completely insane. His dedicated fairy, still worried about the situation, asked if he had just gone crazy, because if he continued acting like that, something big would happen soon. Seok explained that all of that was part of the process of a true hero, and that a mere sparrow like her could not understand the intentions of a phoenix. Suddenly, one of the workers fell to the ground, and once again the protagonist mocked him, asking if he had skipped lunch, because that would be the only explanation for him to be crawling like a worm. The system notified that Raidrun's affinity had increased, and that he was close to reaching the objective. He took advantage of the situation and thanked the commander, but Raquel began shouting even louder, saying that he had said he wanted an adventure and to escape from there, asking if he really thought that was any kind of adventure or escape. Seok explained that he was just doing what the system told him to do, because the hero system was the hero's duty. Raquel remained confused and asked where there was a mission in which he had to gain the favor of a cow-headed guy from the Demon King's army. Seok insisted he was telling the truth, and if she did not believe him, she could read it. He opened the system panel again and began reading. The system said, "You who fell into the Demon King's army fortress from the beginning due to some idiot's mistake." Raquel refused to believe it because the way the system was speaking was also strange, since it was supposed to use only formal language. Seok asked what she would do if it were true, since he was an SSS-ranked hero, so the system could also be different, but she still refused to believe it. The previous night, the dedicated fairy had asked again if he had gone crazy and questioned whether he would not freeze like that. Nearly losing his patience, the protagonist grabbed her again and began squeezing her, saying he was not crazy and his mind was not breaking either. He did not feel cold because of practical training. In the middle of this, the system appeared with heroic text, saying that from the beginning, due to some idiot's mistake, he had fallen into the Demon King's army fortress. It could be as depressing as not having toilet paper in the bathroom, but he did not need to despair. Fortunately, an opportunity had arrived. He needed to gain the favor of Raidrun, an executive of the Demon King's army, to become a true hero. He needed to use his enemies. If he succeeded, the reward was 100 hero points. When he read all that, he was surprised, but decided to follow the mission. Back in the present, he was acting like a true tyrant, ordering the slaves of the Third Corps of the Demon King's army to start singing. The dedicated fairy remained shocked, asking if that was really the mission the system had given him, since only higher authorities could alter mission content, so why would they do that just for Seok? Suddenly, Zack approached the protagonist and called him, telling him to follow as it was a summons from Commander Raidrun. Back in the commander's office, Raidrun was pleased, as he had heard that the efficiency of the slaves' work had greatly improved. The protagonist continued doing everything he could to gain the commander's trust and said it was not his merit because he was just a foolish human, and all that progress was thanks to the commander's wise leadership. Raquel felt embarrassed, asking if he really thought such crude flattery would work, but Raidrun crossed his hands and the system notified that favorability had reached the goal and the heroic text was completed. Because of that, his hero points were also obtained, and it was the first acquisition of the month. Both were surprised to see that such flattery had actually worked. In any case, the protagonist thought it was best to leave it as it was, since gaining favor was already complete, and now it was time to move on to the next step of the plan. He changed the subject with exemplary politeness and told the commander that if it was all right, he would like to train the slaves. Raidrun asked why he wanted to do that. The protagonist asked him to imagine and began explaining that elite worker slaves could move in perfect order. Labor specialists who, without laziness, could do the work of several in just 3. If they achieved that evolution, they could complete the expansion of the fortress in 1 week. Even thinking the idea was good, the commander found it a bit bold, since combining hard labor with intense training with weak human endurance might not work well. The protagonist said that was what an ordinary commander would say, but once again praised Raidrun for being so admirable. Touched by the request and the praise, Raidrun allowed it. Raquel was almost falling into despair, saying that unfortunately the hero had gone completely insane. Not only had he become an agent of the Demon King's army, but Now he would also force the slaves to train to increase the army's work efficiency, and that made her so sad she could not live anymore. Seok told her to be quiet as she was giving him a headache and asked her to listen carefully because he had a plan. However, the fairy refused to listen, asking if he was planning to manipulate her again with his fluent speech. Seok asked if she really thought he was an idiot and explained that he was planning to start a rebellion using the slaves. Raquel stood up and asked what a rebellion was. The protagonist explained that there were 3,000 human slaves in the fortress, while there were about 500 soldiers from the Demon King's army. In addition, not far from the fortress, he heard that there is an allied human forces command post nearby. That is exactly why the Demon King's army is trying to speed up the expansion of its fortress. And when the rebellion happens, they will take advantage of the chaos and request support from the allied forces. Raquel is so impressed that she asks whether he was not just an ignorant man who only knew muscles and fighting, because after that explanation, she was moved. In addition, the protagonist says that now all that remains are the hero points he received from the mission. The fairy is impressed, asking if he really received them, and if that mission was not fake. Seok points out that he had already said the mission was real, and that after receiving the reward, a hero shop also appeared. Now he is curious to know what is inside it, begging for it to be something good. As soon as the protagonist realizes what is in there, he is happy, thinking that he finally has a hero skill. However, he becomes a little discouraged as soon as he starts receiving the rewards, because he got the skill to hold his breath longer and also gained endurance, allowing him to withstand things better. Completely irritated because of that, he says that the rest of the things in the shop are about cooking, cleaning, and washing clothes, and questions whether that is really a skill a hero would need. Raquel starts laughing, saying that this is probably because the shop is still at level 1, and if he manages to accumulate even more points and raise the shop's level, then he will probably get something a little more useful. But the protagonist was so irritated that he tries to hit her, telling her to shut up, because she is nothing more than a scammer fairy. The next day, the slaves were gathered, and the protagonist asked for everyone's attention. All the people present line up, saluting the Demon King. Seok says that they need to begin with the hymn of the Third Legion and asks them to start singing. The army begins to sing, saying that they are the great army of the Demon King, that they must defeat humans and devour them, and that they must also forget all the pain of being captured. And what in the heavens could be higher than that? For their devotion to the Demon King is absolute. The commander, who was watching all of this, says that it really was good to allow the training. Sometime later, Zack enters the commander's room saying that he has urgent news. He reports that the human army is advancing in that direction. In addition, he heard that the 8th Division, which was confronting the humans, fell into a trap and was completely defeated. The commander thinks that the 8th Division is the largest unit in that area, and if it was truly defeated, it is only a matter of time until the human army reaches them. And now they will have to abandon that fortress, whose expansion is almost finished, which is a shame. Zack, still frightened by the news, tells the commander that there is no time and that he must evacuate immediately. But Raidrun asks him to wait a little, and while looking out the window, points out that since ancient times, war has been a matter of logistics and supplies. The first principle of war is to never lose a competent foreman. The commander orders Zack to go first and says that he needs to take Seok and that he will follow right after. Outside, the protagonist was trying to stall, asking everyone if they could not run in sync. But the truth is that because of the vigilance of the cow-headed guy, that day's combat training was ruined. In addition, his stats had gone up a little, but were still far from enough to allow him to win. He questions whether there is not some kind of satisfying growth event. Raidrun drops beside him, and the protagonist is startled. Raidrun looks directly into Seok's eyes and says there is no time, they need to leave together. Confused, the protagonist asks where they are going. Meanwhile, the human army was advancing under the leadership of its commander and easily defeating the goblins. The human commander spots that tall figure and says that he is the Red Nightmare called Raidrun. The human commander tells the regular soldiers to retreat because the knights will deal with the Red Nightmare. Seok looks at that situation and questions why the human army is there, but decides to let that go because maybe this is his chance to betray the Demon King's army and return to human society, which means that this is the perfect opportunity for his plan. One of the knights charges at the Red Nightmare, saying that now he will be eliminated. However, he is defeated in a matter of seconds. Raidrun activates his fighting technique and, with just one blow, destroys all the ground around him, preventing the human army's movement. The commander looks at the protagonist and calls him by name, asking if he is all right. Seok realizes that the commander's strength is something terrifying and salutes, saying that he will leave immediately. However, all the Red Nightmare did was open a gap so they could escape. In a short time, the entire fortress that was being built was taken by the human army. The human soldiers begin separating the prisoners, and one of the soldiers approaches the older hero, asking if all of them are heroes. The veteran says yes. The soldier tells them to go to the other side and explains that in Droshan, they separate heroes from ordinary prisoners. The veteran gives thanks because at last they are being treated like heroes. Suddenly, another person arrives and welcomes the heroes, introducing himself as Olavin Grimir, Duke of the Drossen Empire and commander of the Allied forces. Another soldier reports to the commander, saying that the transfer of the prisoners has been completed. Grimir smiles and says that they did good work. The soldier points out that all those who call themselves heroes were also gathered. The Duke says that now it is time to begin. He orders all the soldiers to take their positions. The soldiers draw their swords and point them at the heroes, saying that before their eyes, the destruction of the heroes will begin. In a place a little farther away, in the middle of the forest, the protagonist was almost falling into despair, saying goodbye to the other world, goodbye to his adventure, and even to his second life. He thinks that he needs to take down anyone who comes so that he will have no pursuers. His dedicated fairy tells him to get over it and explains that this is a great opportunity because she herself will go straight to headquarters to properly assess the situation of the Demon King's army. But Seok tells her to shut up again because she's nothing but a fraud. Raidrun wakes up and says that he ended up sleeping a little, then asks what the protagonist just said. Frightened, he tries to smooth the situation over, saying that it is nothing, because it is an honor to accompany the commander on a journey. Raidrun becomes happy again, and says that he is truly very pleased with the high expectations the protagonist has. He points out that if the protagonist continues his excellent work at the headquarters of the 3rd Legion, where they will arrive soon, he will be rewarded. In addition, as soon as they arrive at headquarters, he will formally enlist the protagonist in the Demon King's army. Seok becomes even more worried, saying that it is an honor. By dusk, they finally arrive at their destination. The Red Nightmare tells the protagonist to follow him because they will have an audience with the commander. Seok continues acting politely, saying that it is an honor to meet the esteemed commander so quickly. Raidrun says that this is very honorable, however he would like to give a piece of advice and asks the protagonist to be very careful with his manners in front of this commander, unless he wants to lose his life. Seok becomes worried, however he had always heard a saying that even in a tiger's den you'll survive if you stay sharp. They finally reach the commander's office and Raidrun introduces himself. The commander tells them to come in, but the protagonist realizes that the voice is a woman's and questions whether the commander is really a lady. As soon as they enter, the commander is sitting in her chair and asks who that is, because Raidrun became even stronger since the last time they saw each other. Seok becomes embarrassed, wondering what he should do at that moment, and decides to just give thanks for the kind words. Raidrun apologizes for not having been able to protect the fortress. Hemis tells him to stay calm because that was clearly the fault of the commander of the 8th Division. Irritated, she says that she should have skinned that useless fool long ago and turned him into a bag of bones. Just by the pressure of her anger being released, the protagonist begins to feel that the air has become heavier, affecting even his breathing. He realizes that that pressure is on a completely different level from anyone he has ever met. Hemis says it is better to leave that conversation aside and asks who that human with Raidrun is. The Red Nightmare introduces the protagonist, saying that he is the talent he had reported earlier and that this time he is there to formally enlist in the Demon King's army. She approaches him, saying that Seok is very cute and that a talent personally chosen by the Red Nightmare means she can expect great things. The protagonist, without knowing exactly what to do, simply agrees, saying that he can do anything. Hemis continues analyzing the protagonist's situation and says that with the body he currently has, even if he joins the Demon King's army, he will be devoured soon. Raidrun agrees with her, saying that this is inevitable. However, he points out that it is not as if a human has never joined the Demon King's army, so if he is given permission, he himself will train the protagonist. Hemis says that Raidrun should not waste time on a mere human. Suddenly, her head opens up, and a huge mouth appears, leaving the protagonist completely terrified. She pulls an animal out of her own body, saying that from then on, the protagonist will be assigned as the caretaker of her pet. She says that the animal's name is Bobo and asks whether he is not incredibly cute. But the protagonist thinks that that cannot be a dog, much less a pet. It looks more like a demon born in hell. Raidrun points out that even though it is only a puppy, he can feel its strong power, which shows that it is an animal of a noble race. She agrees and asks whether the Red Nightmare also agrees with that, but notices that Seok had a strange reaction and asks if he does not like the animal. The protagonist salutes, saying that he is an aspiring recruit to the Demon King's army, and that it is an honor for him, a mere human, to serve Bobo. She becomes a little calmer, saying that this is exactly how he should react. As soon as she releases Bobo, he goes straight for the protagonist and bites his head. She explains that her pet is in a growth spurt, so he should be careful not to let him go hungry because he becomes sensitive. In addition, it is bothersome to replace the caretaker after he has been eaten. Seok says that he understands the explanation and will keep it in mind. Sometime later in Bobo's house, Raquel could not believe that while all of this was happening, a new hero mission had appeared right in the middle of the Demon King's army. He asks her to speak more quietly because if she keeps shouting, she will end up waking Bobo. The system says that now he has become Bobo's caretaker, but he is probably wondering why he needs to do something like that, and even if it seems grim, he needs to endure it because they say it is better to put up with it, even when it comes to dogs. In addition, he needs to gain Bobo's favor in order to survive and escape someday. The protagonist thinks that this time, a mission with an impressive reward appeared, and the content is still strange. The system not only offered him the cow-headed guy, but now he has to gain the favor of the Legion Commander's pet dog. While he was thinking about that, someone knocks on the door and another goblin appears. Frightened, the protagonist shows submission, saying that it is a pleasure to meet him and introduces himself. However, what really draws attention is that a goblin is being treated as a caretaker, which shows that he is seen as an even more valuable delicacy. He asks where the other caretakers are, but the goblin says there are no others, and that all of them were eliminated. Therefore, from that day onward, the two of them will take turns preparing Bobo's meals. The protagonist asks if that is all, and the goblin says yes, and that if he understands, he can go to the kitchen immediately. But suddenly Bobo appears behind the goblin and licks him. The little green dwarf runs in fear since he did not know Bobo was awake and says that the protagonist is a special human meal and very fresh. Seok asks what that idiot dwarf is thinking, but the goblin only tells him to keep quiet because, in any case, one of them is going to lose their life there. Seok says that if that is the case, then let the other one's mother cry in his place and throws the goblin. Bobo is delighted by that and devours the goblin in seconds. The dedicated fairy was running, trying to escape from Bobo, and screams that no matter what happens, this has already gone too far. While she was begging for help, the protagonist was carefully looking at the system. He finds an option written as extra large bone in the hero points section. He thinks that might be exactly what he needs. He buys it from the system, calls Bobo, and asks whether he wants to eat that. As soon as he gets the dog's attention, he throws the bone upward, telling him to catch it. Bobo jumps and manages to catch the bone in midair. Raquel, exhausted, says that he managed to find a very good item, but he could have done it a little faster. The protagonist says that this is all thanks to his genius, which does not overlook even the smallest things, and at this rate, that mission will also be completed without problems. But while he was talking, Bobo almost tears a piece off him, and the dedicated fairy asks whether he really will not have trouble completing the mission, because apparently the bone was not enough. Frightened, Seok says that apparently he needs to find some fresh meat, but the fairy tells him not to do anything stupid. Under pressure, facing the fierce gaze of his pet, he starts thinking of something so he will not be devoured, and the magic word that can calm an angry dog is walkies. As soon as he says that word, Bobo, who had been enraged, stares at him and simply hugs him. As soon as he manages to calm the fierce dog, they begin to run while he asks where the kitchen is. Raquel also keeps looking but cannot find the smell of food anywhere. She suggests asking a goblin who is walking by. The protagonist goes up to him to ask for directions, but the goblin is confused, asking why he was running and why there was a human there. But suddenly, Bobo approaches and becomes irritated again, frightening the little goblin. The protagonist says that he was just walking around because it is a little Bobo's walking time. The goblin, still trembling with fear, asks what a human has to do with Bobo. Seok tells Bobo to come back because he should not go around eating anything he finds. The dog ends up obeying, and the protagonist explains the situation, saying that from that day on, he is serving as Bobo's caretaker. Therefore, he would like to know where the kitchen is, but the goblin was so frightened that he starts running, telling the protagonist to follow the path to the left. Seok and Raquel start laughing. The protagonist asks why that guy is such a coward and wonders if he is really part of the Demon King's army too. However, he says that now that they managed to get meat from the kitchen, maybe this is the end. She agrees, saying that the plan worked very well. The fairy says that in fact the situation is very funny, but asks whether he is planning to spend the rest of his life cleaning up after a dog. The protagonist asks what kind of talk that is, because his destiny is to meet and marry a lady with golden hair. But as soon as he looks down, he realizes that Bobo is no longer there. Desperately, they start running all over the place trying to find where the dog went. The protagonist remains desperate, thinking that that dog causes trouble the moment he takes his eyes off him. The fairy spots him and asks the protagonist to look. Seok tries to calm the dog, asking him to sit because he had been worried about his disappearance. But Bobo comes back with some blood in his mouth. Suddenly, a huge commotion begins inside, saying that Commander Regis was eliminated and that a search to find the one responsible has begun. The fairy approaches and says that the one responsible was probably Bobo. They begin to run from the goblins, and the fairy asks the hero whether they're going to die like that, but he tells her to be quiet if she is going to say things that bring bad luck. While running, he ends up entering a dead end, and other goblins appear saying that the human who eliminated the commander is there. The protagonist tries to calm them down, but the goblins were already dividing up who would get which part. Another says that if the commander has not been fully digested yet, then they can take turns, and they comment on what kind of taste he might have. Seok focuses and thinks that he needs to stop acting that way because a real man needs to stand his ground. He looks at the group of goblins and shouts, saying that that guy is brilliant, and asks how they dare confuse the glorious being beside him with some appendage. One of the goblins asks whether that is not just a monster, but Seok explains that that dog is Bobo. However, the goblins do not believe him, asking whether that monster is what Commander Hemis raised, because he is too peaceful and clearly that is some kind of human trick, and if it is true, he needs to prove it. The protagonist puts the dog on the ground, saying that if they do not believe he is Bobo, then that is a shame. One of the goblins asks whether he is planning to run, but the protagonist only says that demon mode is activated. Bobo's eyes begin to shine and drool runs from his mouth, and he lunges at the goblins, eliminating them with ease. As soon as the goblin leader is eliminated, the protagonist asks whether there is still any demon who doubts Bobo's existence. All of them bow, asking forgiveness for not recognizing Bobo. The system says that he demonstrated overwhelming charisma and congratulates him, increasing his skill. He is surprised to see that this also counts as an achievement. While he was boasting in front of the goblins, the commander approaches from behind, because she was confused by so much noise there, but apparently the new recruit is causing a great commotion. Sometime later, inside her office, the commander asks if he managed to survive by using her and her pet as an excuse. Seok lowers his head and says that he made a very serious mistake, but Hemis asks why he is so sad, because what he just said was a compliment. She touches his face, saying that she thinks he's very human, and unlike those simpletons, he is very intelligent, and that is good. And above all, she emphasizes that the protagonist is not an ordinary human because he has a lot of courage. She points out that the demonic army tries to solve everything with brute force, and because of that, she has far more than just headaches. The protagonist asks what she's talking about, but the commander points out that he will soon find out, then changes the subject by asking whether he wants to become an executive. Seok cannot understand how he received a proposal to become an executive with his current abilities. She points out that indeed, that is basically impossible right now. However, she cannot let him continue using her name and Bobo's name. The demonic army has a way of removing opponents from their position, so she will officially protect him for 1 month, and after that, he will have a decisive battle with someone she chooses and must win. That way, every time he wins, she will extend his protection within the 3rd Legion for 1 month. She says that he must climb the hierarchy little by little like that, and when he becomes a battalion commander or something of that kind, he will become a little more useful. In a trembling voice, he asks what happens if he loses the battle. She says that in that case, he will not be allowed a peaceful death, because he will have to be eliminated during the duel. Sometime later, while walking, he explains that he accepted because it seemed that the commander would eliminate him if he refused. In addition, he cannot believe that she was able to choose an opponent for the duel at that moment. It is easier said than done. Raquel sighs, saying that apparently she will be separated from the hero after 1 month. Seok looks at her and asks whether it is already confirmed that they will be separated, because she had said that his potential was SSS class. The fairy asks whether he does not know what potential means, and points out the definition of potential is possibility, not fixed power. The protagonist gets a little nervous, saying that she's supposed to be his dedicated fairy, yet she is not even rooting for him. The protagonist looks at the door and notices that there is something strange and thinks that there is no way that can be considered a kitchen. He opens the door cautiously, asking if anyone is inside. A person who was there smells him and says that apparently the protagonist is the human the commander had mentioned. He introduces himself as the head chef called Hulken and asks what the protagonist is looking for there. Seok explains that he is looking for a snack for Bobo, preferably fresh meat. The chef asks whether Bobo's trainer changed again, but decides to refuse the request. The chef questions why he should help a human, because the commander's order was not to touch Seok. The protagonist insists and asks whether he really cannot make an exception. Hulken looks to the side and says that if he really wants some meat, then he will have to hunt it himself, just like the goblins. The protagonist is surprised to see that, questioning whether they really are cooks, because no matter how he looks at the situation, they are just butchers. However, he keeps looking at the chief, not understanding exactly what he meant by hunted himself. Sometime later, a huge boar was about to attack the protagonist and one of the goblins who was with him. Seok cannot understand how he ended up there, but the boar attacks the goblin and kills him. He thinks that the goblins had said that this would be a hunt, but they are simply going straight into combat without thinking about the consequences. Because if they keep going at that pace, the protagonist can barely tell who is the hunter and who is the prey. The fairy asks what they should do, suggesting that they run away. Seok asks whether she really means that he needs to cut a path through that crowd with some miraculous strike. However, if he stays there, he will also be in danger, so in that case, he really needs to do something. Suddenly, the chief calls out to him and the protagonist says that he is already going into battle, but the head chef says that in that case, it is not necessary because the first hunt is already over. Seok cannot understand how they won after taking such a beating. One of the goblins goes to the head chef to report the situation and says there have been 12 deaths and many wounded. Seok thinks that is a huge loss for such a small goblin army, but Hulken thinks that is excellent and says that after a brief regrouping, they will find their next prey. The protagonist calls his devoted fairy and says he has thought about it a little and decided to give up on escaping. She is surprised and asks if he is really thinking about hunting demon beasts in that gap. He says no and questions why he would do something like that. He explains that after analyzing the stats, they increase with level gains, and that if that is really the case, all he needs is enough experience to level up. Raquel ends up agreeing, saying that is true, but she does not know how they can get experience in that situation. Seok asks whether he will get experience if he manages to land the final blow on the prey. She says yes, but points out that this method is very risky. However, he only thanks her for the answer and says it is time to go back. He thinks this is not the time to be picky about things like that because if the captain's words are sincere, he needs to grow no matter what happens within a month. He heads to the head chef. Hulken is surprised to see him since he thought he had run away. Seok tries to smooth things over and says he would never do that, but thinks the chief is really sharp. He says that this time, he also wants to join the battle, following the example of the brave army of the Demon King, but the chief only looks down on him, calling him a bastard. The protagonist is shocked, saying that was a bit too much, since the cow-headed chief normally likes that kind of talk. But then, Hulken bursts out laughing, because for a mere human, the protagonist says some surprisingly pleasant things. Seok says that is all thanks to the influence of the great chief. Hulken decides to specially entrust the protagonist with leading the next hunt. In addition, the chief explains that for them, the vanguard is the most honorable position, and because of that, they would never give it to a newcomer, but he will make an exception. Seok tries to get out of this mess by saying how could he possibly stand in front of such noble demons since if he, a mere human, leads, the other cooks might end up taking offense. Suddenly, one of the goblins runs to the chief and says he needs to speak with him. Hulken asks what is happening, and the goblin keeps running frantically, saying they are under attack by a demon beast. Hulken smells it and recognizes it, but he did not expect that, among all possible spices, a pack of Urios would show up. Seok asks whether this is a dangerous situation. The chief explains that it is not dangerous, but Urio meat does not taste very good. He pulls the cleaver from his back and says he has no choice, then tells everyone to grab their tools because they are going to add Urio stew to tonight's menu. The protagonist is happy about that because if he can use this opportunity to sneak in and land the final blow, his plan will be complete. Raquel uses her powers to help her master. The system informs him that the protagonist's endurance and strength have increased slightly and that the duration is 3 minutes. The fairy laughs, saying he does not need to get so excited, but Seok punches her on the head and says that if she had that all along, she should have used it sooner. Still, he is pumped up because his chances of landing the final blow have become even greater. While preparing for battle, he thinks he needs to get strong so he can get a noble, golden-haired lady and have only 5 children like a rabbit. He leaps, saying he will protect his retirement. He manages to finish off one of the monsters, and the system notifies him that he has leveled up 4 times, which surprises him, because if he keeps this pace, he may be able to pass level 20 that very day and finally become stronger. One of the goblins prepares to finish off its prey, but the protagonist rushes in and pushes him away, saying he just slipped. He becomes obsessed, saying that all the final blows in the world are his. After that, the second round of the hunt ends and the fairy asks whether he is satisfied now. The protagonist praises her, saying she finally worked hard and apparently all the demon beasts have already been captured and, now that the dismantling is done too, they can return. He looks ahead and notices that the goblins are eating the food raw, which leaves him rather baffled. The chief walks up to him and asks what happened, why he is staring. Seok questions whether the chief really has permission to eat the army's ingredients like that. Hulken explains that this is one of the privileges of being a cook, because demon beast meat loses its flavor over time. Besides, he asks when a regular soldier would ever get to taste such fresh meat, since delicious meat is the reason to live. However, the protagonist finds all of that a little strange, wondering whether this is really a special privilege and whether they would risk their lives over it. Hulken offers him a piece of meat, asking him to eat it because he is also a warrior who fought risking his life and therefore has the right to eat that meat. He's a little afraid to take the meat, thinking he is risking his own life for nothing more than a piece of raw flesh. Still, he ends up tasting some of it and thinks it tastes very good, and that the aroma is a little strong, but that makes it seem richer in flavor. Even so, he thinks it is a little strange and believes that if it were not for Korea, this taste would be criticized by many people, and the dish would be rejected instantly. Because of that, he keeps wondering whether it is worth risking his life for that fragile piece of raw meat. Suddenly, he wonders if it would be possible to prepare food even more delicious than that, and his devoted fairy asks what he is thinking about. Seok thinks that if he can make delicious food, he might gain everyone's favor and manipulate them however he wants. So he decides he needs to become a great chef. Raquel keeps trying to talk to him, but the protagonist ignores her and opens the hero shop. At the moment, he has 70 hero points left after buying the toy bone for Bobo. He decides to invest all of his points into one skill and one item. When he chooses what he wants, his hand begins to glow and the fairy gets scared, asking what he bought. Now that he has what he needs, he can show all the demons what he is capable of. The skill he chose was rank F cooking. With it, he becomes better at cooking, but it costs 50 hero points. MSG is added as a special ingredient and costs 20 points. The protagonist says that is the pinnacle of Korean cuisine. Raquel cannot believe he really spent 20 points just to buy a seasoning and asks whether he still has any points left. The protagonist calls her a little bird and asks whether she really cannot understand the meaning of the phoenix. Because if that is the case, she can see with her own eyes and witness the result. He lights a fire and starts grilling a piece of meat, seasoning it with salt because that way he will enhance the flavor with its primal umami, saying that is matso gum. A few minutes later, the meat is finally ready. He stares at the meat, saying it is juicy and has a wonderful aroma, making it the perfect meal, and says a new world is about to begin. He takes the meat to the chief and asks him to try some. Hulken thanks him for the offer but refuses, saying he's almost full already. But the protagonist insists, saying that meat was grilled with all his heart and that if the great chief Hulken tastes it, he can die without regrets. The chief eventually agrees, saying that if he insists so much, he will try it. As soon as he bites into it and tastes it, his memory returns to his childhood. As a child, he was especially introverted, and his mother, to cheer him up, would always say she would grill meat for him. As time passed, he tried to do a few things, but always failed because he was terrible at it. However, when he got his chef's hat, his mother said everything was fine, because with that he could become an adult. Tears stream down his face as he calls out for his mother. Sometime later, inside the kitchen, the protagonist has a bit of meat in his hands and thanks the head chef. Hulken explains that the freshness of the meat lasts 2 days and that if he needs more after that, he can come to the kitchen anytime. With the meal in hand, the protagonist heads straight to the Bobo's house. He opens the door with a smile on his face, saying, "Daddy is home." However, Bobo is hungry and irritated, but the protagonist gives him a piece of meat, making him extremely happy and wag his tail. Seok calls Bobo his son and tells him to eat well. The fairy watches the scene and tells the protagonist that, apparently, he has become a great owner. Seok throws several pieces of meat in front of Bobo and says that if that is not enough, tomorrow he will hunt again and bring more meat. Bobo becomes so happy that the system identifies that his affection has increased and the affection goal has been reached. With that, he gains 200 points. The protagonist is happy, thinking this was expected and that everything is going according to plan, and now it is finally approaching. The fairy asks whether the mission was successful. He says that this is as tough as gukbap and needs to be kept as emergency money. Taking advantage of the situation, he opens his status panel, since he has accumulated quite a few bonus points. Raquel explains that bonus points are used to increase stats and asks whether he still has not used them, because if that is the case, he is losing 20 life points. But the protagonist looks at her and asks how could he have used them recklessly before even knowing what they were, since there was no way to know, because no tutorial was provided to him. The fairy looks a little embarrassed and asks whether she really made that mistake, because if so, she can explain now. She starts saying that bonus points can be distributed among the 4 basic stats: strength, endurance, agility, and magic. Strength represents raw power. Endurance represents toughness and resilience. Agility refers to speed in general, and magic is the magic itself that he imagines. The protagonist asks whether he cannot put his points into charisma, but Raquel says no, because that is a hidden stat and cannot be increased with bonus points, only through training. In addition, she says that since the 4 stats are basic, it would be better to raise them evenly. The protagonist disagrees and asks whether she is sure, because normally it is more effective to put all points into strength in this kind of situation. The fairy says that is complete nonsense because in the beginning, even if he gets stronger, later on magic becomes much more important since it is obvious that a body enhanced by magic is vastly superior to a pure physical fighter. The protagonist distributes the points and asks whether it is correct. Currently, his strength is level 31, agility is level 29, endurance is 33, magic is 10, and charisma is 23. His skills are sword mastery at level D, clairvoyance at level E, and cooking at level F. Raquel says that is not bad at all and tells him to go to the shop and learn the basic magic operation skill. Seok asks what that is, and she explains that it is a skill that allows basic magic use, as the name suggests, and that it probably costs around 100 points. The protagonist decides to take a look and start searching for the skill, but he cannot find it. The fairy is surprised, saying that cannot be right, and asks whether he is really looking at the hero shop. Seok takes a deep breath and, disappointed, says he had thought that for the first time she would finally be useful, but apparently she has a talent for being constantly useless. Raquel thinks she's being treated unfairly. 3 weeks later, the protagonist is completely exhausted, but he has finally reached level 100. He takes a deep breath and says that took longer than he expected. Raquel explains that the higher the level, the more experience points are needed. But thanks to this evolution, the protagonist also managed to increase his basic stats, bringing his strength to level 54, agility to 51, endurance to 53, magic to 51, and charisma to 26, and asks whether there is any other hero who suffers as much as he does. Raquel asks whether he is not in a completely comfortable job. That makes the protagonist angry, and he pushes her to the ground, asking whether she knows how many times he nearly got eliminated just that day. She explains that normally heroes take more than 6 months to reach level 100, and that she just wanted to be friends with him. Seok gets up and says that in any case, there is always a problem. Suddenly, a goblin opens the door and calls the protagonist, saying the commander is calling for him. Sometime later in her office, Hemis says he seems a little better than before since he has become much stronger, and his magical power seems to have more than doubled. Seok explains that this is all thanks to the effort he made to feed Bobo fresh monster meat every day. Hemis points out that even so, his growth is extraordinarily fast, which makes her wonder whether it is because of the hero system. The protagonist is surprised, asking himself whether she is really saying he is a hero. She stands up and asks him not to be so surprised, because she knew he was a hero from their very first meeting. The protagonist asks how she found out, and she explains that she knows a madman who is an expert on heroes. The commander says that now the protagonist has to think for himself, and asks why he called him. He thinks it could be a finishing blow or robbery training, but decides to say it is because of their duel. Hemis says that is the right answer and asks whether he had forgotten the promise they made to each other. He replies that he remembers clearly everything they agreed on. The commander starts laughing, asking whether he really remembers, and suddenly transforms, releasing an extremely aggressive aura and asking over and over why that is, saying that if there is blood, then there will be blood. She states that the moment when the audience gets most excited during a match is not flashy performance or a crushing victory, but the moment of an unexpected reversal. The protagonist begins to think about this and concludes that the monster's psychology must be the same, realizing she probably prepared an opponent he could never defeat, waiting for a twist. Considering that she is giving a warning, it is because she is certain that at that moment he will lose. Raquel asks what they should do and whether they will end like that, but the protagonist gets nervous and says he has no plan, so he needs silence to think. Using his experience as a professional fighter, he explains that the important thing before a match is to know the opponent, so they need to investigate how strong he is and what abilities he has. The fairy says they only know the opponent's name and that the final decision will come soon, so she asks how they will find out that information. Seok explains that there is an item he wanted to buy in the hero shop called a combat power measuring device. This device measures power by combining the target's strength, endurance, agility, and magic, and can determine their approximate power, and it costs 50 points. The fairy is impressed by the device. Seok explains that with it, he can confirm the opponent's combat power, and knowing that information, he can train with someone of similar level, turning the simulated battle into the perfect training session. Raquel takes a deep breath and says that, in any case, the protagonist's calculating mind really is world-class, but he replies that it is still better than someone who cannot even use their head. To test the device, the protagonist decides to measure his own team's stats and sees that his devoted fairy has a total score of 375. Raquel says she does not know whether that is high or low and asks whether the protagonist wants to try. He hands the goggles to her and asks her to test it. However, she says nothing, and the protagonist gets worried, asking what is wrong and whether she could not see anything. But the fairy, surprised, says that is not it and comments that maybe the device is broken. because it makes no sense for the hero to be stronger than her. The protagonist's score was 1,560. He is not surprised, because he thought she was talking about something serious, and asked whether she is saying he's very weak. Raquel is devastated, crying on the floor, saying that if it were a few months ago she would be a normal person. He explains that in any case, there is no problem with her performance, and decides to test once more, analyzing Bobo's combat power, but when he sees the result, he is stunned, because the score is 47,422. That makes the fairy even sadder, saying the two of them are complete failures, worse than a dog. To make sure what is strong and weak, the protagonist goes out to check the level of other people. He thinks the weakest is the little goblin, since the rest have levels similar to his. Valkman passes by the protagonist and he realizes that his combat power is 14,300, which places him at an official level. He asks the fairy whether she had said he would fight the squad leader. She replies that his name is Taklilan, the pig-headed orc. Seok says the squad leader's combat power seems to be around 3,000, so maybe he can handle that with a few more levels, but looking more closely, he realizes the pig-headed orc is probably the one right in front of him. An orc was pounding the ground and its current strength was 6,671. The protagonist cannot believe it, and Raquel asks what kind of absurd plan that was, because that only means they are going to die. Suddenly the system appears, informing him that if he is a hero with 300 combat power points inside the castle walls, he will gain 300 more points for 1 week. He thinks that in any case it will be death or a knockout, but there is no way to avoid it and decides that he will definitely survive the next battle. The next morning, inside the kitchen, he comes rushing in. The chief notices the goggles on his head and says that seems to be a unique piece of equipment, asking where he got it. The protagonist explains that he saw another veteran using one and decided to buy one too. The chief asks whether that is what is fashionable among kids these days, but tells him to leave that aside for later because they need to prepare for the hunt. Seok puts on his goggles and sees that the head chef's score is 35,230. He is shocked, asking why it is so high since that should be the combat power of a regular company commander. However, he realizes that the head chef is the strange one, since he has always seemed suspicious, and concludes that the kitchen squad is made up of very strong individuals with 2,000 points or more. The protagonist thinks that perhaps because they are under high-ranking officers, their combat power is much greater than that of regular soldiers, and if that is the case, by fighting someone with power similar to Golbakum, he can reach a level close to theirs. Seok takes advantage of the situation and asks the chief to let him train with one of the cooks. The chief asks whether he is talking about a fight, and the protagonist says yes, because he wants to learn how to help better in battle. Hulken says he is already strong for a human and does not need to be so impatient. Seok replies that it is fine, because if the chief does not like it, he can eat the ghoul meat alone. Hulken stops him from leaving, saying he has been waiting a long time for someone like him, and asks who he wants to fight. A moment later, some goblins are gathered, and one of them asks what is happening, since it is almost time for the hunt. But as soon as they find out the protagonist will fight Golbakum, they get scared, thinking he may die there, and that they do not want to lose the delicious meat he prepares. Golbakum has a combat power of 2,620. The goblins, unwilling to lose their food, start arguing, saying they need to stop Golbakum, but the head chef shouts at them, saying they cannot do anything. Hulken goes up to Golbakum and asks whether he understood the rules, emphasizing that under no circumstances should he kill Seok, so he needs to go easy. Slowly, Golbakum says he understood, but the chief does not seem convinced. Even so, Hulken declares the fight between them has begun. As soon as the fight starts, Golbakum only thinks that he must not eliminate the opponent. The protagonist charges at him full force, and Golbakum tries to attack, but Seok dodges easily because the strike relied only on instinct. He then counters and lands a direct kick to Golbakum's face, since he has fought many times in this style. As soon as he lands the blow, he thinks he won, and the fight really comes to an end, with Golbakum falling to the ground. Hulken announces that Seok is the winner. The spectators are confused, asking what happened since everything was so fast. The protagonist cannot believe he knocked down that monster with just one kick, and thinks that, if that is true, then at this level, he has a chance to win. Sometime later in the giant northern forest, they gather for the next hunt. Seok is excited, thinking that he managed to knock down an orc with twice his combat power using a single blow. And that proves he was right, because combat power is only a number, not an absolute power. He believes that if he keeps getting stronger, he will be able to win the duel easily. One of the goblins goes to the head chef and reports that a large group of Dallas cubs has appeared ahead. Hulken asks whether that place is their habitat. Seok asks why he seems strange, and whether it is because Dallas are not good either. The chief replies that is not the case since Dallas meat is actually delicious, especially the bone marrow, which is considered a delicacy, but They live in groups and have strong maternal instincts, so messing with a cub can cause serious trouble. The protagonist suggests that maybe it would be better to give up the hunt that day, but the chief hesitates and says that the meat of those monsters is incredibly delicious, so he cannot let it pass. He raises his cleaver again, telling everyone to get ready because tonight's meal will be Dallas meat stew. Hearing that, the goblins charge forward eagerly, as they really want to taste that meat. One of the Dallas trembles in fear, and the protagonist once again takes the lead in the fight, thinking that the experience points of that day have just appeared and that the final blow needs to be his. Sometime later, Seok is finishing off the last monster of the hunt. He laughs, saying that even a risky plan is working and that now he will go to the kitchen. However, he begins to feel the ground shaking and looks back, asking if the queen has appeared. A massive monster is there, and the head chef shouts that the Dallas queen has just shown up. The queen looks at the bodies of her kin on the ground and becomes extremely enraged. The protagonist puts on his goggles, wanting to know how strong that creature is to cause so much panic. However, as soon as he tries to check the queen's level, a red warning appears, indicating that measuring combat power is impossible at that moment. The protagonist begins to question whether they were hunting those cubs without any kind of plan. As soon as he realizes what he is about to face, his legs start shaking, and he asks the chief what they should do. However, the chief is already running, shouting for everyone to try to survive if they can. Suddenly, he starts hearing multiple screams, and when he looks back, realizes that everyone around him is being completely wiped out. The goblins cry for help, asking where the chief is, but the queen does not care and continues roaring furiously. Just her scream alone is enough to give the protagonist a splitting headache. Raquel tells him to look back, and when he does, he sees several smaller Dallas approaching. He realizes that the fight is already lost and tries to run as fast as possible while the goblins are torn apart. As he runs, he understands that if he stops even for a moment, it will be the end of his life, so he needs to find a way to escape immediately. After running for a while, he finds the entrance to a cave and wonders if something lives there and whether it is safe. Raquel says it is empty inside because she already checked. The protagonist thinks he definitely does not trust her much, but there is no other choice, since at least it will be safer inside than outside. As they walk through the cave, he notices it is very deep and asks the fairy whether it was naturally formed. Raquel says she does not know, but that it is indeed something very large, and that even that spider queen could enter there. Suddenly, he senses the queen's scent and looking to the side sees a slime-like substance on a rock. He approaches and touches it. Raquel cannot believe what he just did, since the head chef said there should not be any colony of those spiders there. Seok thinks that had been bothering him for some time, and wonders if that could be spider silk, because if so, he just entered the queen's home, which is not good at all. Suddenly, a spider opens its eyes and prepares to attack while the protagonist tries to retreat. Raquel screams that an adult Dallas has just appeared. Frightened, they start running in the first direction they find. The fairy asks if that is the right way, but the protagonist says he has never been there before, so there is no way to know where they are going. Suddenly, he steps on something slippery and falls to the ground. He realizes he will not have time to escape anymore, so he needs to find something heavy to use as a weapon. He grabs one of the eggs and throws it at the Dallas. The spider catches the egg, and Seok realizes it got distracted trying to protect it. Confused, he asks why the spider is acting that way. Raquel explains that what he threw was heavy, round, wet, and sticky, and looks a lot like a Dallas egg. He looks around and realizes they really are eggs, and that gives him an idea. He grabs another egg and tells the monster that it will not happen again. The spider reacts strangely once more, showing that his strategy is working. He gets ready and throws the egg hard against the wall, and the spider does everything to catch it. The fairy is impressed by the monster's physique and asks what the next step is. Seok says there is no choice, since there is only one option. Sometime later, the fairy provokes the spider, saying that all the eggs have already been broken and that it could do better. Seok asks Raquel to bring another egg, but she says that was the last one. The protagonist is surprised, and the adult Dallas, consumed by rage, charges at them. The fairy panics, saying they are going to die, but Seok tells her to apply the buff immediately. The spider keeps advancing, blinded by fury. The protagonist, now strengthened, thinks that the opponent is already exhausted from trying to protect the eggs and that now he just needs to focus, because victory is possible. The Dallas attacks, and he realizes that this is the final moment. He charges straight at the Dallas, and his blow causes a massive impact, destroying part of the spider's body. The system starts notifying him that he is leveled up, and even without believing it, the protagonist asks if he really won. Raquel asks if he is okay, but the protagonist is extremely exhausted and tense and says they need to get out of there. Raquel shows him how to use healing magic, and the protagonist is impressed to see that he can use it as well, realizing that investing points in magic was worth it. The fairy points out that it is not very reliable, it is just an approximate test, so he needs to use it carefully. He agrees and says that now they need to make a stew and return quickly. With just that monster, he managed to reach level 108, distributing points into each basic attribute. He is happy about that because now his magic and other abilities are finally balanced. Even though he still does not know how to use them properly, just thinking of them as an investment for the future is already beneficial. Suddenly, the protagonist hears a voice asking if that is Seok. He immediately recognizes the voice. The head chef appears beside him, laughing because he cannot believe a human is still alive. Seok asks the chief why he also ended up there. Hulken explains that he found that cave while running away and decided to enter, which shows that both of them were very lucky. But Seok says that is a Dallas nest. Hulken is surprised and asks if those things on the ground are eggs, and the protagonist confirms, saying that is a Dallas incubator. The chief's eyes shine and he grabs one egg because that is a delicacy that only high-ranking officers could dream of tasting, and now it is right in front of him. The protagonist yells at the chief, telling him to stop that because they need to get out of there immediately. Hulken grabs one of the eggs and says that those who were chasing him have already entered the nest and that, besides, the protagonist would need to be at least a division commander to capture the Dallas Queen. So he intends to enjoy his last meal. While they talk, they begin to hear voices coming from the cave. Some goblins appear, saying even the chief is there. Hulken comments that those are the survivors and that they are lucky to be able to have one last meal. Hearing that, the protagonist starts to panic, wondering if that really will be his last meal. However, he gets irritated and thinks that he will never allow that to happen, since he has not even received a proposal from his future wife yet. Determined, he says that this time he will escape, even if he has to turn the world upside down. Meanwhile, in the commander's office, Raidrun arrives to speak with her. The commander says he is always very rigid and asks if he completed the mission that had been assigned to him. Raidrun replies that he did, and explains that he managed to capture the next Saint Knuckle of the Sacred Empire as she had requested. Hemis is extremely pleased, saying he is truly incredible and that this was expected, since he managed to defeat that fanatic group in just 3 weeks. Raidrun thanks her, saying that is too much praise while she pats his head. Suddenly, someone knocks urgently on the door. She asks what is happening since everything was going very well. A goblin arrives with urgent news and explains that the cook soldiers went out to gather ingredients and suffered an accident. Hemis says that is nothing unusual since it happens every day and asks why he is making such a fuss. The goblin replies that this time the situation is far more serious because the Dallas Queen appeared suddenly. Most of the cook soldiers, including the head chef, are dead or missing. Raidrun and Hemis are shocked by the news. The commander asks about the protagonist and the goblin says he is also missing. Hearing that, Raidrun completely changes his demeanor and asks again if he is really missing. Meanwhile, inside the queen's nest, the goblins argue and wait for death, while the head chef tells them to enjoy it while they are still alive because soon they will meet in Valhalla. Seok hits the chief with a book and Hulken asks what is going on. The protagonist explains that the chief seemed to be under some strange spell, so he tried to wake him up with his secret weapon. It is an encyclopedia of magical beasts, apparently useless but extremely valuable, containing almost all information about their abilities, and it cost 50 points. He reads that spider-type magical beasts live in groups and have particularly tough legs, but to defeat a Dallas, it is necessary to attack its relatively weak body, especially the head. Their body fluid is highly flammable and their eggs are as explosive as bombs. Their saliva is used to produce Dallas extract and is also vulnerable to fire, so the best strategy is to use fire magic from the inside out. Seok asks the head chef if he can use fire magic. The chief says yes, but only to the extent of launching it. However, Hulken tells the protagonist to give up because the skin of those spiders is not weak enough to be pierced by fire magic. Seok says that does not matter because they will not attack the queen directly. The protagonist takes command and tells everyone to pay attention because he has an escape plan. He says they need to stay alive to keep eating delicious food like that, but that is not enough to motivate them. So he raises the stakes and promises that if they escape, he will make unlimited high-class magical beast meat for everyone as a reward. Hearing that, the goblins get excited, and even the head chef stands up and pats the protagonist's shoulder, saying he is doing well because to enjoy delicious food, one must first be alive. Excited, he asks what the plan is. After explaining everything, the protagonist tells them to remember every step exactly because from now on they cannot stop for even a moment. He emphasizes that they must run non-stop until they reach the exit. With everything set, the group moves toward the exit and encounters a swarm ahead. Seok grabs an egg and tells Hulken to set it on fire. As soon as the egg ignites, he throws it into the middle of the swarm, causing a huge explosion. But the Dallas keep advancing, and Raquel warns that they are being cornered. The protagonist explains that if the eggs catch fire and collapse, everything will be destroyed. The previous explosion creates a distraction. as the spiders stop to try to protect the eggs, allowing the group to advance, triggering new explosions to push the swarm back. Shortly after, only one egg remains, so he needs to find the exit before using it. The fairy points ahead, saying there is light. Seok narrowly dodges an attack and thinks he just needs to hold on a little longer. After some time, they manage to shake off the spiders and the protagonist celebrates, saying they will finally escape alive. However, at the exit, the queen is waiting. From deep inside the cave, the screams of the other spiders echo. The protagonist holds the last egg while the queen, completely furious, stares at the group. The head chef comments that the queen has returned and asks if that is the end. The protagonist focuses and realizes that does not mean the end, because the queen did not attack even after seeing them, and the reason is clear. He tears part of his shirt and tells Hulken to set the cloth on fire. With the burning cloth near the egg, he shows it to the queen and says that is one of the last remaining eggs, and if it explodes there, everyone will die because the cave will collapse and destroy all remaining offspring. He orders the queen to back off, otherwise they will all be buried together. However, the queen is consumed by rage and cannot think clearly. He tries to keep convincing her, but she slams the ground and lets out a terrifying roar. Accidentally, the fire falls onto the egg and Raquel panics, asking what to do. Seok throws the egg behind him, saying he does not know either. The egg hits the wall, causing an explosion, and the structure begins to shake. The ground trembles and everyone realizes the cave is collapsing. The protagonist shouts for everyone to run immediately. An adult Dallas tries to attack him from behind, but it is crushed by a rock. The system notifies him that he leveled up. The fairy tries to pull him, telling him not to stand still, because they need to get out before it is too late. Another Dallas is crushed by the collapse, and he levels up again. The explosions intensify, and the entire cave begins to crumble, wiping out almost the entire Dallas colony. Because of that, he levels up several times in a row. He cannot believe that all those Dallas that died turned into experience points for him. He realizes he was responsible for destroying the cave. His body improves with every moment, and he concludes that even without knowing all the answers, he first needs to get out of there. Raquel feels relieved to see that he has come back to his senses. As they run, he realizes that even if they move forward, it will be difficult to escape while the queen keeps blocking the exit, so he needs to distract her somehow. However, when he looks back, he sees the chief holding the last egg like a trophy. He offers the egg to the queen, saying that if there is no other way, he is willing to hand it over. But the queen simply attacks him, and the protagonist thinks this is his chance to try to escape, because he will survive no matter what. However, the queen realizes he was trying to escape and traps his arm with her web. Desperate, he starts wondering if that really is the end, but someone manages to block the queen's attack. Raidrun appears at the last second and asks if Seok is okay. The protagonist is surprised to see him there. Raidrun, with a relieved smile, says he always believed he would be alive, but now he will take care of the rest. With devastating power, he starts burning the queen, releasing more and more strength. Seok is amazed by what he sees. Finally, the queen is defeated. Out of a total of 105 cooks from the Demon King's army, only 6 survived. The remaining 99, including the head chef, were eliminated or are missing. Sometime later in the Bobo room, the dog runs to the protagonist and starts licking him. Seok laughs and says he really almost died just to live through that story. Even Raquel, who had been desperate, spent the entire time wondering what would happen, but thanks to that idiot, she managed to return safely. Seok tells her to enjoy the moment because she might really die soon. She is shocked and asks why he said that. The protagonist explains that the decisive battle is approaching. Raquel says that even so, he has grown a lot. Seok agrees because since the dungeon collapsed, he managed to gain 75 levels in a single go. He's now at level 200, with strength at 80, agility at 77, endurance also at 80, and magic power at 78, while his charisma rose to 27. In addition, he still has 200 hero points. Raquel says there is still a gap, and the protagonist agrees, since the opponent is very strong with approximately 6,000 combat power, so there are still about 3,500 points missing. The fairy says she will do a surprise test and asks what would happen if he reached 6,000 combat power, since maybe by leveling up, he could also acquire that monstrous strength like the orc. The protagonist disagrees, saying he does not think that happens just by leveling up. She says he is right because that kind of power is not just raw strength, it involves magical power, so to face him, he has no choice but to use magic in the end. He takes a deep breath and says it is easy to say what needs to be done, but asks whether that will just happen whenever he wants. Raquel says he has already used magical power before. Seok is surprised and asks when that happened. She replies that it was clumsy and that calling it magical power manipulation might be an exaggeration. He remembers when he was under pressure and felt a slight surge of power for a moment, wondering if that could be considered magic. Suddenly, Raidrun opens the door and calls Seok. The protagonist gets up and asks what brought the commander to such a humble place. Raidrun tells him to come along because they are going to see the commander together. In the office, Hemis asks Raidrun what that means and whether the reason for the visit is really a personal request. Raidrun asks for permission to personally train the protagonist in combat. Hemis asks why he wants to do that and why she should allow it. Raidrun explains that although the orc Kirkeen is a squad leader, he confirmed that his abilities are comparable to those of a vice company commander, and if things continue like this, the protagonist will certainly lose. Confidently, Raidrun states that the protagonist has immense potential and that he wants to see his future and help him grow even more. The protagonist is surprised by that statement, but imagines the commander would not allow such a thing. However, Hemis calmly says it is fine, since she is in a good mood and will allow it. She says that if that is all, they can leave, because she needs to deal with another matter. Before leaving, the protagonist comments that Hemis's generosity is immeasurable and that he would like to thank her again. Hemis says he has become twice as strong as before and that it is interesting to see someone grow so fast for the first time. However, the protagonist is surpassing expectations so much that she begins to feel uncomfortable. If Seok joins Raidrun, then Kirkwain might actually lose, so it would only be fair for her to give something to Kirkwain as well. Sometime later, Raidrun takes the protagonist to his personal training ground. The protagonist is surprised to see that he has a massive exclusive field. Raidrun observes Seok and notices that there is already a considerable amount of magic within his body, but the fact that he cannot use it is unfortunate, although that must be because he grew too much in a short period. The commander thinks that the correct way to teach him would be to present the basics of magic manipulation, but the decisive battle is in 4 days, which makes that unfeasible. He concludes that the only remaining option is that growth always comes with suffering. He tells Seok to protect his teeth because the training will be brutal, and then throws an extremely powerful punch to the protagonist's face, sending him flying. Seok thinks his trainer is completely insane because he said they would train but started beating him without warning. Raidrun keeps advancing and tells the protagonist to focus as much as possible because if he cannot defend the attacks with magic, he will end up dying. Seok asks him to stop, but the trainer keeps attacking. He manages to block a kick without using magic, even while being pushed back. Raidrun finds that strange because the protagonist's physical abilities are not that exceptional, but his dynamic perception and reaction speed are at the level of a highly trained knight. Moreover, the fighting spirit within him is extraordinary. Raidrun remembers the first time they met when the protagonist managed to land a blow on his face, something that did not happen by chance. Seok's combat sense is surprisingly refined. At that moment, he decides to trust that instinct. The commander reveals that he made a bet with the Legion commander, stating that without magic, the protagonist will never be able to win, and that instead of being humiliated in front of everyone, he would rather everything end there. Seok takes another powerful hit and realizes that if he takes one more like that, he will certainly die. He begins to think that both in his past life and in this one, he never managed to get married, love, or even have children. Raidrun advances again, and the protagonist, tired of being beaten, prepares to counterattack, determined to fight until the end, whether for death or glory. His fists begin to be wrapped in an incredibly powerful energy, and his attack causes a massive explosion on the ground. When the dust settles, Raquel runs to him, who is lying on the ground, and shouts his name. Raidrun also approaches and says he finally managed to manipulate magic. Seok raises his hand and thanks him, saying that the heavens finally answered his call. The commander grabs his hand and says he is doing very well, and that if he keeps it up, he will definitely be able to win. To help him even more, Raidrun decides to heal him to speed up his recovery. But as he starts channeling his healing magic, the protagonist feels intense pain and begins to scream. Raidrun is surprised because demonic energy acts like poison to humans, and for a moment he forgot that the protagonist is human. He picks him up, apologizes, and tells him to endure a little longer. There are affinities between the forces that make up that world: magic, divine power, demonic energy, and human energy. Divine power belongs to those who serve the gods. Among them, the Daoist Church holds the greatest religious power. By instigating religious wars, most beliefs outside Daosis were eliminated, and now it reigns supreme in the sacred empire of Gartland. When Gartland selects an individual capable of hearing the voice of God, they treat that person as a saint, and the person Raidrun captured and keeps imprisoned is the next saint, Agnes Mariette. The goblins wandering around question whether that saint is really genuine because everyone says she is a saint, yet she has not prayed for 2 days. Another goblin states that Commander Raidrun would never make such a mistake. Mariette questions why she should pray, because even if she did it for God, what would be the point? That makes her think that maybe it would be better this way, instead of remaining in such a cult. Raidrun rushes into her room, telling her to get up. Mariette says he is being very rude and asks what he thinks he is doing. Raidrun shows the protagonist in his arms, saying that there is a human who needs healing. Meanwhile, inside his subconscious, the protagonist was thinking that his head hurt a lot and questions what Raidrun did to him. He cannot believe that the last hand he held in his life was that of a man, because if he had known that would happen, he would have at least held Raquel's hand. Still very weak, he manages to open his eyes and see the saint in front of him and asks why there is a silver-haired beauty there. That makes him think that he died again and was dragged into a multi-level marketing scheme right when he thought he was finally getting somewhere, but apparently life is like that. Still hallucinating, he tells the angel that he does not want to be a hero anymore, because he would rather become a great mage at 30 years old, since that is madness. He keeps saying random things and the saint becomes confused. The protagonist says he has one last request before reincarnating, because if Raquel is planning to make him a hero again, he would like to ask the angel to marry him in advance this time. Suddenly, he hears a voice saying that he is the weakest and wakes up startled. Raidrun had been by his side the whole time and is surprised to see that his disciple has finally woken up. He hugs the protagonist, thinking he was going to lose his friend. Seok was also completely lost in that confusion because he thought he had died. He realizes that the woman beside him is the saint and is a real person, which makes him even more embarrassed seeing that he said all of that in front of her. Raidrun asks the saint if the protagonist is fully stabilized, and she says it is not quite like that because as he can feel, the demonic energy is not leaving his body, so she does not know what will happen after that. Raidrun asks if divine power really cannot eliminate all the demonic energy. Mariette explains that if she tries to do anything, the protagonist might end up dying, not to mention that the demonic energy may disappear over time, so the best option is for them to just observe for now. Raidrun feels a bit burdened because of all this and apologizes, saying that he will repay the protagonist with training and growth, so they need to return to the training field. Seok questions whether he really needs to receive such passionate guidance, even being a humble human. Raidrun simply starts dragging him, saying it is time for them to go, even as the protagonist asks him to wait a moment. Mariette becomes confused seeing a human hero being trained by an executive of a demon king, so she cannot understand what kind of person he really is. Seok thanks the dog because he heard that Bobo had destroyed the house because he misses him. Besides that, he also ate a soldier who had been fed. The protagonist decides to thank him again because if it were not for the Bobo's anxiety to see him, he would still be stuck in the training field. However, what worried him the most was that a lot had happened that day, even demonic energy being inside his body. Seok, scared, asks Raquel if he could die because of that, but the devoted fairy was trembling and crying, calling the protagonist dirty because the hero she must serve had been contaminated. Seok tries to comfort her, saying that the one who should be crying is him, so why is she like that? Raquel keeps being upset, saying that all of this is her fault, both the filthy demonic energy entering the hero's body and the hero almost dying, and all of that is because she stripped an angel's skin and because she is a lunatic that belongs to an endless hell. Seok realizes that she is really not well and goes to her, asking her to stop saying those things and questioning where he could find a better companion than her. But the little fairy keeps crying, asking him to stop saying those things because she does not want to hear what he does not truly mean. The protagonist gets a little irritated with the situation, seeing that she is on strike, and asks himself how long it will take to calm her down because that is driving him crazy. Suddenly, the saint appears beside the protagonist, saying that she will apply water after training. He tells her that she also looks beautiful that day, but that makes her a little uncomfortable, and he apologizes for saying that. While she was healing the protagonist, he said he had a favor to ask before the duel. He emphasizes that he would really like her to pray for him to survive tomorrow's duel, and if it is not too much trouble, he would also like her to go watch it. That makes the saint surprised because he was the first person who treated her normally there. The next day, early in the morning, the Colosseum was full of people saying that a human dared to challenge a commander and that he's an idiot because humans are weak. The presenter says his name is Jack and that he will be the host of the commander's decision match. Hemis was enjoying that moment, saying that the atmosphere was very good, and asks Raidrun who he thinks will win that duel. Raidrun says that he bets all his chips on his disciple because he is doing his best and is also very talented. Hemis says that if that is the case, she would like to make a bet, and if the protagonist really wins, Raidrun may continue teaching him. Raidrun asks what will happen if the protagonist loses. Hemis looks at him and with a cold voice says that if that happens, Raidrun will have to eliminate him with his own hands. Raidrun starts trembling, however. He says he accepts the terms and will do it if necessary. Hemis becomes very happy because she does not remember the last time she felt that excited. Jack begins to introduce the competitors who will participate in the duel. Raidrun looks at the protagonist and thinks that everything is fine, since he does not show any sign of nervousness. The protagonist thinks that he managed to acquire new skills and became much stronger than before. His new skill is the Lidran-style combat technique, based on the Kutan fighting technique. Passed down by the Kutan clan, it is a martial art refined by Lidran, consisting of a total of 10 forms that overpower opponents with great force. Seok remains confident, thinking that even if his proficiency and skills is a bit low, somehow he has to manage. So no matter what happens, he will win that duel, and after that he will go meet the silver-haired saint. Raquel appears beside him, shouting that he finally returned. The presenter introduces the competitor, Kurukwan. The devoted fairy becomes frightened upon seeing her hero's opponent. The protagonist is also surprised, seeing that his opponent looks very different from last time. Raidrun also realizes that appearance is wrong, but Hemis tells him not to give up on the bet. Kurukwan lets out a powerful roar, scaring the people around him. His combat points are currently at 10,573. Seok cannot believe that in just a few days his opponent's power surpassed 10,000. Raquel asks if that could be the work of an evil spirit and if it is a simple purification. The protagonist prepares for combat, saying that nothing ever goes smoothly, but he will not give up, and charges forward without thinking twice. Kurukwan prepares to attack him, and Seok knows that if he is hit by that strike even once, it will be the end of the fight. However, his opponent's movements are wide and linear, so he just needs to stay calm, accumulate damage, and look for opportunities to attack. He manages to dodge the first attack, landing a direct hit on the opponent's face. Seok realizes he still has an opportunity and attacks again, landing another punch on the opponent's face. Kurukwan remains standing and unmoving, which surprises the protagonist, seeing that his opponent took 2 direct hits and is still fine. Kurukwan takes advantage of the short distance and tries to attack. The protagonist realizes he will not be able to dodge the blow and tries to protect himself with his arm, but with just that attack, his arm is already broken. He looks at the opponent and realizes that he seems fine. However, his movements are still easy to read. Besides that, in his previous life, he faced fights more difficult than that one. He thinks that he needs to control his fear and remember the teachings from that day. He needs to apply battle aura to his technique, because that is how he can split the ground and break stones with just one punch. And even that destructive power is not everything that exists in the fighting spirit. His trainer said that what matters is the fighting spirit, in the end, a technique to completely eliminate the opponent. Raidrun points out that he does not know where or which martial arts the protagonist learned, however. In that state, he would never be able to defeat Kurukwan, since he does not possess killing intent, so his strikes are never strong enough, and an attack without the will to kill the enemy is, in the end, just indifferent. Kurukwan keeps advancing while the protagonist remembers every word of his master. What matters is the opponent in front of his eyes and the mindset of wanting to kill. Seok focuses to the maximum and advances with his superior speed and sharper battle instinct, managing to land a direct blow on his opponent's abdomen, causing a great impact. That is Seok's combat technique. The pressure released by the energy begins to take over the arena. Jack says that amidst the cloud of dust obscuring the arena, he cannot see exactly who won. The saint asks if the protagonist managed to win, but as the dust begins to fade, Kurukwan appears lying on the ground with a hole in his chest. The presenter says that the winner of that decision match might be the protagonist, a weak human. Seok, trembling and basically out of energy, thinks that that cursed skill, if he does that twice, might end up eliminating someone. Raquel runs to him, saying that he really did it and completely shattered that pig's heart. Seok sits down on one of the stones and asks if he really won, but suddenly, Kurukwan's body begins to regenerate. Jack says that this cannot be because competitor Kurukwan achieved a miraculous state. The protagonist cannot believe what he is seeing and asks if that guy is really moving, what in the world a demon commander is, and what kind of trick he is using. Raidrun realizes what is actually happening. Hemis not only shared her energy with Kurukwan, but also cast an immortal curse on him, which makes him question what she is thinking. Hemis assumes that mastering aura in such a short time is a surprising talent, however, that was already within her expectations. Inside the arena, the protagonist asks Raquel if that thing is really alive, and Raquel says that that monster is moving on its own, and that cannot be true because how could a mere human surpass that power? Kurukwan advances again, and Seok thinks that the opponent is using the same move as before and that he can easily dodge. However, when he tries to move, he realizes that his leg does not respond, which makes him get caught by Kurukwan. Before taking the hit, he grabs Kurukwan's arm, saying that he must die in silence, and tries to break his arm, but Kurukwan's energy is even stronger. The protagonist realizes he will not be able to do anything before taking the hit and ends up being thrown away. As soon as he hits the wall, he feels something very strange and thinks that this is similar to when he died before, the sensation of Wen's energy being Suddenly, he hears someone telling him to get up. He looks up and realizes that the saint was talking to him. He asks if she really thinks he can win, and in his thoughts, she answers yes, because he cannot give up there. Seok gathers his strength and even with his body completely injured and in pain, thinks that even if he were to die, he cannot look pathetic in front of a woman he likes. Because of his willpower, he begins to release an extremely intense aura around him, saying that if the opponent is going to break his arms and legs like armor, he starts moving and the system says that the mana mastery operation increased from level F to level E and from level E to level D. As he jumps to attack, he shouts, inviting the saint to go on a date with him. He lands a blow on Kurukwan's head, telling him not to get up anymore. Kurukwan hits his head on the ground and kneels before the protagonist. The energy that once emanated from Kurukwan's body begins to slowly disappear, making him return to normal. With a smile on his face, the protagonist says that that crushing blow could shake the ground with its pressure, so he was wondering what would happen if he concentrated that power on the head, and the truth would appear now. He attacks Kurukwan again, smashing his head into the arena floor. All the spectators fall silent. Hemis asks Raidrun if he taught the mana operation technique, but Raidrun says no, because this is the first time he has seen that method. Inside the arena, panting, he tells the saint that the date will be 1 night and 2 days, including lodging. Hemis is surprised and tells Raidrun to be more careful if he really taught that, because the protagonist is a true monster. The heroine of the demon army says that the protagonist reminds her of a somewhat unpleasant face, and that will become even more interesting from now on. After some time, the protagonist wakes up in bed in panic, asking where he is. Raquel asks where else he could be and explains that that is the lodging. A bit confused, the protagonist asks about the match and his experience. The fairy explains that he is there, that the saint just healed him and already left. However, he does not care about any of that and goes straight to the system, asking where the status window is. He looks at his attributes while Raquel was saying that she could have healed him too, but the protagonist is more interested in his status since his level increased a lot and all his other stats increased by 12 levels. Besides that, he notices that mana operation also went up 2 levels. Raquel is impressed, saying that this is absolutely unprecedented, but Seok says she's making too much noise again. She asks what the reaction was during that period. The protagonist gets a bit confused by the question, but Raquel explains that mana operation is not a skill that triggers like in some exaggerated fantasy novel, and she does not know how that was possible. Inside the confinement chamber, Mariette was looking through the window and wonders if she really did something different from herself. However, she thinks that the protagonist is truly not a normal person. Awakening his own mana in 3 days and even mastering aura is something that even a true knight would take more than a month to achieve. It is not something a normal human could do. His potential is terrifying. Besides that, she thinks his personality is very strange. Even so, she considers the protagonist so extraordinary that she does not know if God answered her prayers or if his potential is simply immeasurable. However, that does not matter to her because either way, everything is fine, since the result was the same. He overturned an expected defeat, and perhaps he is the hope she had been waiting for. She goes to the door and knocks. The guard asks what she wants. The saint says she has a request and emphasizes that she would like to take a walk. Seok receives a letter saying, "See you in the garden after dinner." His hands start trembling because he realizes that it is an invitation to an SS class date. During the night in the middle of the forest, the protagonist is trembling, thinking that he is on a real date. He questions what he should start with. He does not know whether to ask for her number or exchange correspondence. The fairy says she will ignore all of that and return to the room, but Seok holds her, and she asks why he always ignores everything she says. The protagonist looks at her saying that it has been a long time since they last saw each other, but he is surprised to see that she is with 2 guards and asks who those formidable people behind her are. The saint explains that the 2 are escorts, because the demon army said she cannot go out alone. Seok thinks that now it makes sense, since she is a saint imprisoned by the demon king's army. Mariette calls him to take a walk. As they walk, the protagonist becomes completely frozen because he was already nervous enough, and now, with those 2 terrifying guards behind them, he cannot say a single word. Mariette takes a deep breath and asks the protagonist if he is a hero. That surprises him, and he asks how she knew. The saint explains that in that world, black hair means hero or demon. Besides that, he grew exponentially. The saint says that he should also ask her some questions, because apparently he has a lot to say. The protagonist thanks her for the opening and asks if it is possible for a saint to fall in love with a man again. She does not know what to answer, but Raidrun appears running desperately, shouting for the protagonist, startling him, since the mood was getting good and he suddenly appeared. Raidrun says that the Legion commander wants to see him immediately, so they need to go there. The saint becomes a bit disappointed because she was on a date with him, and the protagonist, with tears in his eyes, asks if it really needs to be immediate. Mariette begins to wonder if she can really trust a man like that. Hemis tells the protagonist that he is very good at dueling because seeing him not die and come back alive every time is impressive. She asks if he still remembers the offer she made. The protagonist, a bit afraid, says yes, because she said she would protect him in exchange for dueling the opponents she chose. She says that is exactly it and asks what he thinks. The protagonist, a bit confused, asks if she told him to become an officer and work under her command. She explains that honestly, the officer part was just something she said casually because she thought he would die anyway. However, she changed her mind and says that Raidrun said that because the protagonist is clearly a talent worthy of being a commander in the Demon King's army. So maybe in the next duel, she is thinking of asking him to do something else because they cannot use that talent only as a squad leader. Besides that, as he knows, the kitchen suffered devastating damage. Therefore, there is a big problem with supplying meat to the officers, and they are practically eating each other. The protagonist says he understands, but asks why she is telling him that. Hemis explains that from that moment on, he is the company commander, and to be more precise, he will become the commander of the culinary company. She emphasizes that he can recruit as many cooks as he wants, and that the day after tomorrow, the kitchen will be functioning normally just as she predicted. She asks if he can do that. The protagonist becomes even more frightened and says he will do his best, but wonders if this is really the only way to stay alive. After some time, elsewhere, Raquel was completely irritated with that situation, saying that the protagonist is a hero who has now become a company commander in the Demon King's army, and asks if he is now happy and feeling important since he was promoted. Seok tells her that he feels great because either way, she is still very naive. He puts on his glasses and says that now he must begin his work as a company commander. As soon as he enters the kitchen, he asks Smigol what mommy is doing right now. Smigol looks at him and asks which mommy he is talking about because apparently the meat grilling slave has finally gone crazy. Seok gets irritated at being called a slave and says Smigol is wrong because from now on they need to call him company commander, and he kicks Smigol. He orders everyone to be gathered there immediately. As soon as everyone comes closer, he starts analyzing everyone's combat power and notices that the average in that group is around 2,000 points, and the strongest one is at about 3,500. But what really catches his attention is that very few people are left for that squad. Before, there were around 300, and now it does not even reach 30. Even so, he has no other choice. He needs to do that, otherwise the Legion commander might end up killing him. He greets everyone and asks those who know him to raise their hands. Some people say he is Seok, the barbecue machine, but another raises his hand saying they are wrong because the protagonist is just a delicious human. Seok shows his authority by hitting the one who said that and says he is the company commander because that is now his title, and shows a paper saying that this is the Legion commander's order appointing him as commander of the culinary company. From that point on, they need to treat him with proper respect. Besides that, he would like to know why there are so few cooks, so whoever can explain should raise a hand and speak. One of the cooks explains that everyone went hunting without a commander and ended up being wiped out by demonic beasts. The protagonist takes a deep breath, saying they are the kind of people who do not think about consequences. So that makes sense, because it is a natural consequence of not even having a proper search group. After finding out what really happened, he asks who the best cook there is. Everyone says it is Galchul, better known as Smigol. The protagonist points out that if he is the best cook, then he will become the assistant company commander and asks if anyone has any objection. Everyone says no and agrees with him, since they saw what happened to the first one who made a joke. He sits on a bench and starts thinking that the minimum number of people needed for a kitchen is around 200 or more, and gathering that many people in a single day will be very complicated, but apparently there is only one path. He calls Bobo to solve the situation. Raquel asks if he is really going to threaten everyone by using Bobo as leverage, and the protagonist explains that this is Plan B, because there is only one condition for choosing a cook: someone easy to replace and who will never be able to challenge him. While looking around, he finds an easy target with around 1,931 combat points and attacks him, calling him Duperge and telling him to join the kitchen. But the goblin gets angry, saying the protagonist is just an insolent human who has gone crazy, so he will be eliminated right then. However, Seok lands another blow, telling him not to talk like that. He points out to the goblin that he is the first recruit of the day and asks if he knows what that means. The protagonist explains that the military is all about seniority and hazing, so if he agrees to join now, there will be few people above him, and then he just needs to bring other easy targets so they will be mistaken for him instead. The goblin asks if it can be only 3 easy targets, but the protagonist tells him to bring his friends and says 5 will already be enough, because in the future, when others are hit 10 times, his will be reduced to only 1. Somewhere else, the monster was eating a piece of meat and said that this is very peaceful and that this elegant meal is truly proof of peace. That is the captain of the Demon Lord's army of the 3rd Corps, 3rd Direct Unit called Doris. One of his subordinates opens the door shouting that they have an emergency. Doris asks what all that fuss is about and says it is not elegant. The subordinate explains that a large number of members of their battalion were assigned away. Doris asks if it is desertion because they are a bunch of useless guys who do nothing but serve him. The subordinate explains that is not the case because all of them were recruited as cooks. The commander says he heard that the new head of the kitchen is a human valued by Hemis. Doris tells his subordinate to tell them to be more careful next time and they will let it slide. The subordinate keeps insisting, saying that this is not something they can simply ignore because the number of soldiers taken as cooks has already reached 200. Doris is surprised to hear such a high number. Meanwhile, in another place, everyone was gathering together. Raquel says that more than 200 people have already gathered. He replies that this is why she needs to act intelligently. He points out that apparently they already have enough cooks, so they can end recruitment. However, Doris appears there and Seok thinks that this will not be good. The protagonist notices that something is wrong since Doris is always smiling, but now his face looks full of anger. He puts on his glasses and says that this specific device cannot identify anything with combat power above 50,000. And besides that, excessive use may cause damage. He realizes that this will be very bad, so they need to finish quickly and get out of there. Doris shouts, asking if there is anyone there named Seok who serves Lord Bobo. While the protagonist was trying to leave without drawing attention, Bobo barks and reveals his identity. Seeing that there was no longer any way to get out of there, the protagonist goes to him and asks what happened. Doris greets the protagonist and says he is the captain of the 3rd Direct Unit. Doris questions what the protagonist meant by asking what the problem is and asks what he is thinking, because he took all the members of his battalion. The protagonist thinks that was not exactly what happened, because those guys simply chose to leave their own unit. Doris tells the protagonist to follow him because they are going to talk in his office. After conversation, the protagonist explains the situation, and the commander asks if it really was not intentional. The protagonist says no, because he chose only the most outstanding soldiers, and it just so happened that they were all from the Great 3rd Battalion. Doris analyzes the situation and thinks that the protagonist is a human protected by the Legion commander. So, it is better to let this matter go. Doris smiles and says that it is fine, because if that is really the case, there is nothing they can do, so he can take the people he chose. Seok is surprised and asks if he is serious, thanking him very much for the understanding, but thinking that this was truly a blessing. Doris points out that he has one condition, and the protagonist already starts feeling that something is wrong. Doris says that the protagonist is already taking a large number of people, so he would like him to take one more person from his battalion. Seok is surprised by that and thinks that this definitely smells bad. Doris notices that the protagonist's reaction was not satisfactory and gets a little irritated, asking why he does not want to take all the members of his battalion. Seok tries to smooth things over, saying that is not really it and that he is very happy. The commander says that if that is really true, then it is all decided and now he will introduce him, saying that the soldier's name is Usaru, a cute half-breed born between an orc and an ogre. As soon as he appears, the protagonist's glasses flash red. Doris continues explaining that Usaru is a little clumsy and that is his weak point, but he is strong, so the protagonist can make good use of him. Usaru is so huge that he cannot fit through the door, much less see where his commander is. With everything settled, they gather again, and the protagonist decides to introduce himself once more, saying that he is the tamer of Bobo and that he became the new head of the kitchen. Everyone gets scared when they see Lord Bobo, whom they had only heard rumors about. Seok shows a bone to Bobo, saying that he is a good boy. The protagonist points out that from that moment on, the unit will be reorganized. He prepared a new list and they need to check it, and as soon as they check it, they must line up according to the instructions. The fairy asks how he made the list and what criteria he used. Seok explains that their intelligence is probably similar, so he listed them in order of combat power. Those who have already been cooks for a long time, and the weakest ones will be assigned to the kitchen. She says that he is being a great head cook, but the protagonist replies that they still have to see whether this will work. As soon as the new army is divided, the protagonist explains that the right side is the kitchen team, and the left side is the combat team. He asks if anyone is dissatisfied with the arrangement because, if so, they just need to step forward immediately. A goblin raises his hand and shouts that he is dissatisfied because he also wants to be on the hunting team since he really likes eating freshly hunted meat. Seok tells him to come forward, and as soon as the young one approaches, the protagonist treats him very kindly, saying that this is the entrance exam. the little goblin falls to the ground, saying that his future is ruined. Seok points out that if he could not endure even that blow, then he failed and cannot join the hunting team. The system notifies him, saying that with excellence in leadership and command ability, he managed to reorganize the troop and stabilize it. Because of that, endurance capacity increased and control rating also went up. Seok asks again if there is anyone else dissatisfied, but no one says anything. The protagonist says that now that everything is settled, all members of the combat team need to grab their weapons because they are leaving immediately. At the Black Rock Fortress in the north, in the giant forest, they gather together. The protagonist notices that the forest is strange and silent because there is not a single monster in sight. Raquel explains that this is because Bobo and Usaru, due to their strong presence. The protagonist thinks that is a plausible guess, however. Those two are the strongest, so there is no way to be without them. The fairy suggests luring them in with bait. The protagonist gets confused because if he had that kind of meat, they would not have gone out to hunt so urgently. Raquel corrects him, saying that the proper term would be this kind of delicious bait, because the kind of bait she is talking about is another kind. They need to bring the mage there to use him as bait. The protagonist cannot understand what made that poor child become so malicious. Sometime later, the protagonist goes to the center of everyone and says that according to the classification criteria, numbers 7, 14, 3, 1, and 43 need to step forward. Raquel asks what he's looking for, and the protagonist gets a little upset, remembering that the lottery numbers were left on Earth. Still irritated, he shouts that in any case, the operation will begin immediately and orders Usaru to grab number 14. Number 14 gets frightened, asking what is happening and whether the head cook has gone crazy. Seok gives the order, saying that this is the goblin of the continent, and Usaru gets ready and throws number 14 far away. The protagonist thinks that if they throw away the weakest ones as bait, it will attract aggression. He asks another subordinate to light the fire so that the lost companions can see the smoke and return to camp. Raquel gets a little worried, asking if continuing to throw them like that will be enough. The protagonist points out that at least one of the 6 will manage to come back alive and tells Usaru to keep throwing them. The rest of the soldiers get scared, saying that the protagonist is going crazy because they want to live for a long time. Because of that, one of them decides to run away and tries to escape, but the mascot looks at him with an adorable little face. The little goblin gets desperate, telling Bobo that he will devote himself to the Demon Lord's army, but that was not enough. While the little goblin was screaming for help, the protagonist was irritated because the others were late and the first one he had thrown should already have returned. A short while later, the first goblin comes back running desperately, screaming for help, with some monsters chasing him. Seok is happy to see that his plan is working and that now it is time for the soldiers to go into action. While he was thinking that he could land the finishing blow, Usaru rushes forward as soon as he sees the first enemy, saying that the enemy likes to fight, but with just one blow, he splits the enemy in half. The protagonist gets upset because he does not get the opportunity to land the final blow, since with only one attack, the enemy was defeated. While Usaru and Bobo celebrated the first successful hunt, the protagonist was completely frustrated because he did not manage to gain any experience. Besides that, all the components were so crushed that they could not even be used as meat. Even Raquel is impressed because most of the monsters are taken down by Bobo and Usaru, while the rest of the army basically does nothing. The protagonist laments the situation and tells the fairy that they will have to give that up and come back the next day. She asks if he is sure because there is only one day left, but with nothing else to do, he decides to make that choice and shouts to his little army that they are retreating for now and will return the next day. Back in the kitchen, Raquel says that the protagonist had said they would retreat and questions what he is doing there. Seok explains that he needs to see whether they can still use that crushed meat. He gets ready and opens the door gently, shouting that all the brats inside were relaxing and that because of that, they all need to gather with him immediately. Smeagol runs to his chief and asks what is wrong. The protagonist asks whether he received the meat from that day's hunt. The vice head of the kitchen, with a smile full of tension on his face, says that he did. However, the state of the meat was a little frightening. The protagonist tries to teach the subordinate a lesson, saying that a true craftsman does not blame his tools, and asks if he understood. Smeagol gets upset and tries to explain, but the protagonist cuts him off, saying that they are cooks and do not even know how to prepare minced meat. Smeagol explains that the kitchen unit's main function is to acquire ingredients. Unless they are a commander's personal cooks, they cannot even dream of cooking anything beyond boiling. The protagonist says that apparently he is going through a difficult situation and that he understands. Smeagol runs back to the kitchen, telling everyone below his level to light the firewood immediately. The protagonist starts reflecting on what his subordinate had said, realizing that apparently everyone under the commander's command eats that tasteless food. He gets excited because if he plays his cards right, things may happen even more easily than expected. After that, he goes to the saint's room and knocks on the door saying that he is outside. She tells him to come in. The protagonist opens the door, a little embarrassed, and greets her, saying that it was nothing much. Raquel comments that apparently he had no intentions at all. He takes his new creation and asks whether she would like to try an appetizer before the meal. He explains that thanks to her support, he managed to win the final match and, as proof of gratitude, he wanted to invite her to a meal. She thanks him and says that she will try a little. Before eating, she picks up a piece of meat and smells it, thinking that this aroma is truly wonderful and wonders if she can expect great surprises. But as soon as she tastes it, she becomes completely enchanted because it is delicious, even tastier than the food she'd eaten at the castle. That dish has a surprising depth of flavor. Without thinking twice, she keeps eating until she completely finishes the meal. The protagonist is happy and says that since she ate everything, she probably liked it. She gets a little embarrassed and he changes the subject, saying that if she has already finished eating and is satisfied, he will leave. Mariette asks what he plans to do when he gets out of that place. He asks if she is referring to marriage. She gets a little embarrassed but says that she will also return to Earth. Seok says that actually there are other things he also wants to do, but what he really wants to know is what she would like to do when she gets out of there. With a sad look, she replies that if she ever manages to get out, she does not want to do anything. The Holy Empire, where the saint came from, is a theocratic nation governed by the pontiff of the Church of Dosis. One of the subordinates informs the pontiff that they managed to locate the next saint, Mariette. He says that he heard the saint is imprisoned in Black Rock Fortress, where the eccentric glutton resides. The pontiff questions how the next saint could end up in such a deep place. Besides that, he asks whether there has been any contact from the Demon Lord's army. The subordinate says no, that they imprisoned the next saint without any demands at all, which makes him question what they are plotting. The pontiff explains that in the history of the war between humans and demons, the moment when humans captured Black Rock Fortress was almost unimaginable. That happened while Hemis was absent for some time. Therefore, facing them head-on now would be imprudent. He asks the subordinate to secretly send a rescue team. Besides that, they need to summon the hero Oswald. Seok was thinking that he wanted to understand, but he couldn't. While walking through the forest, he arrives at a place and says that maybe there is already enough. He asks the squad leaders to come to the front and center. He takes a rope with some pieces of meat tied to it, saying that they should eat. However, his subordinates were worried, wondering if that could be some new form of violence or maybe a treatment to put them to sleep. Seok asks what they are doing and if they are not going to eat. The squad leaders try the meat and realize that it is delicious. The three of them kneel, saying that they will swear eternal loyalty and ask for at least one more piece. Seok laughs, saying that the chance to taste it is over, and from then on, only the squad that brings back the most living monsters will eat that meat. Everyone starts running, saying that this is a dinner gamble and that they need to hunt the monsters. The protagonist says that this was already expected, because all living beings are slaves to appetite. He takes the opportunity to cut down some monsters and ends up leveling up without realizing it. A short time later, one of his subordinates goes to him and asks who won the contest. Seok says that the winner was the Wolf Squad and they will have a wonderful meal with him. The other participants ask what will happen to the rest of them. Seok explains that there is not much to do because this is a contest, so they must eat what is left. Otherwise, the winner would have no merit at all. Meanwhile, at Black Rock Fortress, someone had eliminated several monsters. That person finally manages to reach the room and knocks on the door. The saint, who was inside, thinks that maybe she said something unnecessary to that man, but she cannot keep him hidden forever. The man who is there to rescue her opens the door and shows his face, saying that he is there to rescue her. She is surprised to see Gapin, who asks if His Holiness the Pontiff sent him. The young man says that apparently yes. The saint apologizes, but says that she will not go back and asks him to leave immediately. Gapin laughs, saying that he really would very much like to go back. However, a mission is still a mission, and asks what he should do. Mariette says that Gapin already knows there is an eccentric glutton in that castle, and if he tries to take her, then Gapin approaches and asks what she is trying to say. She asks what would happen if she drew out her divine power and made him come there, but Gapin grabs her by the neck, saying that a mission is still a mission, and that he is a soldier, not a prince. He tells her to sleep deeply, because as soon as she opens her eyes, she will already be in the capital. The saint wonders why she cannot use her divine power, but keeps thinking that she cannot go back to that place. Suddenly, a hand appears very quickly, and Gapin cannot dodge. The protagonist punches him, cursing him, but Gapin remains standing, asking what he is. A fist imbued with a demonic energy, and that boy looks human, but he does not know what he really is. Besides that, the protagonist's movements are heavy because of the amount of magic he possesses. Seok remains irritated and asks what that guy is saying, ordering him to release the saint immediately. Gapin kicks the protagonist, saying that it is not a mission, but useless materials are always necessary, so he will also have to come along. The blow was so powerful that it made the protagonist pass out. Gapin keeps his guard up, thinking that some insignificant pests are bothering him. Raquel was watching all of that and gets frightened, thinking that the hero was defeated with just one blow. This makes her wonder what she should do, and maybe she needs to take Bobo, but she senses a terrifying presence. Gapin opens the scroll, saying that he had not predicted that variable. However, there is no choice. He keeps looking at the scroll, thinking that if he is going to take one more person, then he will have to fix that obstacle. Hemis approaches, asking if something is not working and if he would like help. Gapin turns around, seeing that Hemis, the eccentric glutton, has just appeared. He thinks that the saint's divine power certainly should have been blocked. Hemis says that if he does not mind, he can just call her Hemis. Gapin gets a little frightened, thinking that he does not feel any demonic energy coming from that woman, and wonders if this is the difference between their realms. The eccentric reserve, glutton. Besides that, she devours thousands of soldiers in a single day, so that seems to be true. Hemis releases her aura, saying that it is time to see the guest's abilities. Her energy hits Gapin. He tries to concentrate so he will not panic and focus only on evasion, because if an opportunity appears, he needs to grab at least the saint and leave. However, he starts to feel a little dizzy, and before he can do anything, he is struck by a blow and thinks that now it is too late. Hemis says that she really likes fighting and asks the guest if he will make things a little more interesting. Gapin thinks that, in his current state, it is better to try to run away alone, because the mission has failed. He activates teleportation, and Hemis looks a little sad, staring at the arm she had ripped off, saying that the guest simply ran away, even though she personally asked him to stay. However, it is alright, because the truly interesting things will begin now. Glutton, ancient monster, immortal mane. These are the epithets associated with the name Hemis in the flow of time that resembles eternity. Countless demons are born and perish, but the Demon King and Hemis, those two demons, remained firmly in their positions, unmoving like Mount Tai. However, infinite time dulled many things. Hemis's words, when she said that it was all right because the truly interesting things would begin now, are something extremely cruel to any creature with reason. A short time later, the protagonist was training or getting beaten up. Raidrun was telling his disciple that his attacks and mana control were still too simple. He needed to think more flexibly and not be bound to a mold. Seok takes a deep breath and says that he will keep that in mind. Raidrun says that he has one more thing to say, because no matter how strong he becomes, there will always be someone more skilled than him. Therefore, for victory, he does not need to be picky about the means or methods. He must always remember that a fair fight is a privilege only for the strong. Raidrun says that this is enough for today and praises the protagonist, saying that he did a good job. But Seok does not know if he really did a good job. He falls to the ground exhausted and passes out. Raquel approaches and asks if he is okay. He answers that he is not and says that if she does not want him to die, he needs a little healing. Raquel starts healing him and the protagonist thanks her, saying that he is already feeling a little better. However, she was not very happy, asking if she is nothing more than a medicine bottle to him. Seok remembers what Mariette had said to him. She asked him to become stronger because only the faith that comes from someone strong would protect him. He thinks that he really does not know what she's talking about, but he definitely needs to become stronger, just as she said. Raquel gets irritated, shouting at him and asking if he is still talking about that woman, because he almost got killed because of that saint or witch. The protagonist says that if she keeps looking down on a saint like that, she will end up being punished by the gods. Raquel says that that assassin used divine power, so if that woman really is a saint, why was she attacked? The protagonist agrees, saying that it was very strange because if she is indeed the next saint, then she should be a precious existence to them. But he says that this is enough and that he wants to stop talking about it. The fairy says no and asks why and whether that woman really is so important to him. Seok simply ignores her and walks away while Raquel says that he is an idiotic moth, crazy about that woman. The protagonist tells her to stop being jealous, but that only makes her even more nervous, making her ask if he wants to die and where he is going. Sometime later, Seok was crying at the kitchen table. He complained that he was already finished and wanted to be reborn as the cat of a rich family in his next life. Bobo was looking at the protagonist without understanding anything, and Raquel asked him if he is also worried about the protagonist, even though he is not his owner, because if something happens to that idiot, things could change quite a lot. 30 minutes earlier, in Hemis's office, she had called the protagonist, saying that she had a concern. She emphasizes that she was bored, so she wanted to see something else interesting. The protagonist says that he is at her disposal. Hemis says that she will give him 1 month and he needs to defeat the commander. This makes him worried and scared because she wants him to fight the commander. Hemis notices this and asks if he thinks it will be too difficult and asks if he wants help the same way she helped Kirkerwan. But he gets so scared that he says he does not need help and lowers his head, slamming it against the table, saying that he will take care of it himself and thanking her for the opportunity. After Raquel explained everything to Bobo, she tells him to say goodbye to the protagonist because he will soon be leaving. She takes a deep breath and tells the protagonist that he should start accepting his fate because how could someone with 9,000 combat points take down a commander? Seok looks at her and says that he is crying right now, asking if she wants to be eliminated. The fairy says that it is obvious the hero has grown exponentially, however the commander is on a completely different level. Seok says that the average combat power of commanders is around 40,000, and that is not a level he can reach in a short period of time. He emphasizes that it would be very good if his dear dog fought in his place, because if it were Bobo, he could match or even defeat a commander. Bobo thanks him for the praise, and Raquel asks if the decisive battle is not one-on-one. Seok answers yes, but while reflecting on what she just asked, he gets a small idea and asks her what the commander said. The fairy says that Hemis told him she would give him 1 month, and he must take down the commander. He celebrates, saying that is exactly it, because she never said they needed to have a decisive battle. So, as long as he manages to catch the commander somehow, everything will be fine. Raquel gets a little worried and asks if he can really interpret what she said however he wants. The protagonist thinks that he needs to lure the commander and cooperate with Bobo, because that is the only way to achieve victory. The fairy asks if he is being smart or cowardly. However, she asks how he plans to lure the commander, since he is a nobody and a hero. So how could he have a way to lure the commander? Seok says that is where she is wrong because he has a great way to lure commanders. He just met one recently, and that pig, despite everything, likes elegant meals. He prepares a recipe for braised rib stew with meat he prepared himself. First, he needs to put the beef ribs in water with honey to drain out all the blood. Then he places the drained meat in a pot and boils it once. While it boils, he needs to slice the mushrooms and green onions, the unique and chewy texture of the eye wolves. Then he adds sugar, soy sauce, and garlic to the water. But he needs to be careful with the screams when peeling the skin of the drake garlic because it has a combat power of 80. The exquisite entrails were squeezed out and he stirs it all together. After that, he needs to combine all the ingredients with the meat and boil it a little longer for at least half an hour. He tries to add a little olive oil, but Bobo was dragging him all over the place. He says that this is absurd and that humans need to become a little more resilient. When he returns to the kitchen, Raquel points at the pot and asks the hero if it is burning. He screams, telling her not to get close. The rib meat is perfect and the rib stew is almost ready. Now he needs to transfer it to a plate and arrange everything perfectly. After the dish is ready, he sprinkles some chopped green onions on top. This is a dish that will steal the commander's heart and can be called flaming ribs. Doris was getting ready to eat and tells Jonggu that this is great because it had been a very long time since he last tasted an elegant paste, and handing Usaru over to the protagonist was a stroke of genius. Suddenly, one of his subordinates opens the door, telling Doris that the head chef is there to see him. Doris asks his subordinate to tell him that Usaru cannot be returned, but the subordinate says that is not what the protagonist wants, because he would like to personally serve a meal he prepared himself as a form of gratitude. Hearing this, Doris becomes enthusiastic, because that boy's cooking must be incredibly delicious. So he had always wondered just how good it could be. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door and Doris tells them to enter. The protagonist enters carrying a flower in his mouth, making a heart with his hand and holding the dish, saying that it has been a very long time since they last saw each other. Doris remains impressed and tries to control himself, asking if this is right and questioning whether the protagonist is there to express his gratitude. Seok says that thanks to Doris, he managed to secure his position as head chef. For that reason, he is apologizing for the delay in greeting him, because he has been very busy recently. Doris says that he understands and that it is all right because that sometimes happens. Seok starts smiling, saying that this is his humble food. He shows the dish, saying that these are roasted ribs prepared with all his gratitude, so he would very much like Lord Doris to try them. Just from smelling the aroma, Doris's mouth starts watering and he prepares to taste a little. The protagonist thinks that with this dish, he will become the god of head chefs, wondering if Doris will be able to withstand all that flavor. Doris finds the food so delicious that he screams that he is suffocating and cannot stop eating because that flavor is far too excellent, and asks how the protagonist made it and if this is a human ability. Seok smiles, saying that he is very happy that he liked it. In addition, he says that if it is all right, he would very much like to ask Doris to try his new dishes in the future. Doris accepts without hesitation, saying that it would be a great honor for him. The protagonist thanks him and says that he will start visiting him a little more often from then on. Doris says that the protagonist is clearly favored by the general commander for a reason. Seok agrees, and with trembling hands holds the door, saying that he needs to go back now to continue cooking. As soon as they leave the office, they look at each other, and both of them start feeling sick, because they could not withstand the pressure inside. Raquel says that the hero really is incredible for having a stomach of iron. The protagonist says that he has a plan and will feed Doris until he becomes even fatter. And the moment his guard is down, then it will be time to start the attack. 1 week later, Doris was once again eating the dishes the protagonist had made, but he takes a deep breath, saying that he does not have much of an appetite. With a little embarrassment, he says that tomorrow there will be a decisive match for the position of battalion commander, and he was probably ignored because he became a high-class bodyguard. The protagonist gets worried, saying that if he loses, then probably. Doris interrupts him, saying that is exactly right. He will no longer be a battalion commander. Seok thinks that now his plan is going to fail. Doris continues tasting the food, saying that meat cooked for so long really becomes very tender. But the protagonist was completely disappointed, thinking that all his effort and the ingredients from an entire week of his kitchen were for nothing. Doris asks the head chef to go watch the decisive match tomorrow because he will be the lucky charm for victory. Seok says that he will watch and wishes for him to be victorious. The next day, the decisive match for battalion commander was about to begin. The protagonist was in the audience, but completely devastated. Raquel tries to cheer him up, asking why he needs to catch an ordinary pig if he can evolve into a super pig. Seok asks if he really can, because he ate so much of his food that he cannot even walk on his own, so how could he win a decisive match in that state? Roy is replacing Jack as the announcer. He is from the Demon King's army, commander of the 3rd Regiment of the Corps. He asks the challenger and the representative to go to the arena now. The challenger, ready and prepared, charges into the arena with everything he has. But, on the other hand, Doris was already almost dead, saying that the stairs are as difficult as always. He looks at the audience and sees that the protagonist is there, saying that he is the charm and now he can win. Seok shouts, wishing him good luck. Roy scolds the two of them, saying that he's a very busy man and asks them to stop being foolish and begin immediately. But Doris was in no condition to stand and complain, saying that this is irritating. Then the centaur challenger charges forward with everything he has. Doris manages to get up and, with only his brute strength, grabs the opponent's weapon. The centaur is immobilized and cannot move his weapon. Doris releases even more strength, firmly holding the centaur's staff, and plants himself on the ground, causing an extremely large explosion in that place. Seok gets startled, saying that the shockwave managed to reach all the way there, and even Raquel did not know that such a thing could be possible. Seok thinks that it was a fleeting moment, but the result of that battle is clear. Roy stands up and starts leaving, saying that Doris is several levels above his opponent, and therefore, he is the winner. He managed to destroy his opponent as if he were a simple ant. Because of this, the protagonist had to make a change to his plans that night, at the Bobo's house. Seok thinks that maybe stealing alone will not be enough, so he decided to reformulate the operations strategy. There is the monster encyclopedia and the monster distribution map that he made himself. That is the map he always used when he went monster hunting. According to his research, powerful entities like Queen Dallas seem to have their own territories. Thanks to the sacrifices of the cooks, he also managed to learn about those surrounding territories. The fairy gets a little worried and asks if he is sure, but the protagonist asks her to listen carefully. In Korea, there is a 4-character idiom like that: dominate the enemy with the enemy itself. If Doris is strong, then they only need to attack him with even stronger monsters. 3 days later, in the enormous forest, Raquel was frightened, saying that she had been memorizing the entire Beast Encyclopedia for 3 days straight, and her head felt like it was going to explode. The protagonist says that this is exactly why he had said they should split it up. She emphasizes that just thinking about that map makes her feel like vomiting. The protagonist shows that the first target is 1 kilometer from their current position. In addition, they have an appearance similar to an earth dragon, but they are a unique entity. Raquel says that it must be a surfiv. In the ancient language, it means forest dragon. Similar creatures include the morstic and the estonvia. However, they must exclude the surfiv since its aggressiveness is very low compared to its power, so they do not fight first. She gets happy that she managed to memorize all of that and asks what the protagonist thought, because she is an amazing, beautiful, and genius girl. Seok says that maybe it seems that way to some extent because even a fool can be useful sometimes. One of the commanders goes to the protagonist and asks if he has already decided on that day's hunting location. Seok says that may be a little farther ahead, but asks him to wait for the right moment. He asks the fairy to tell him a little about a magical beast that resembles a dragon with steel scales. She says that there are many similar types of dragons, so she would have to check them directly. The protagonist keeps looking at the map and says that from now on, there is probably no choice but to confront them directly. The The protagonist speaks to his entire army and orders everyone to clear that whole area, and there is no need to capture them alive. He emphasizes that they can eliminate as many as they want because that day's prey will be eaten immediately. The goblins celebrate, saying that the head chef has finally regained his senses because they can eat and enjoy themselves. The goblins begin eliminating the nearby monsters while having fun with the situation. Meanwhile, Seok simply watched the situation, not very pleased, because even though they were catching many, the boss of that territory had still not appeared. Seeing that maybe the boss was not going to appear, he asked everyone to lower their weapons, because they would stop for now. The commander runs to the group saying that the boss ordered them to drop their weapons, and that they need to light a bonfire. However, a very loud sound begins to echo, and the protagonist gets startled, thinking that he finally arrived. A huge monster stands in front of him, and Raquel says that it is a magical beast called Nidrak. All the subordinates shout that a dragon appeared and that they need to flee immediately. But Seok starts laughing, saying that this is exactly it because that is a monster, so they will be able to defeat Doris. In Hemis's office, she tells Raidrun that something is very strange. Raidrun gets a little confused and she explains that there has been no news from the protagonist for 3 weeks. She asks if it is possible that Raidrun is achieving incredible results, but he says no, because the training he does with the protagonist has been normal. Hemis asks what the chances were of the protagonist defeating a battalion commander-level opponent when the two of them met. Raidrun says that there was no chance of that happening. However, he says that now that they are talking about it, he just remembered that Seok recently became quite friendly with Battalion Commander Doris. Hemis asks if he's talking about that pig, and apparently the protagonist had not understood because she told him to capture a battalion commander, but instead he became friends with one. So what exactly is that boy planning? Back in Doris's office, he was eating again, saying that this was already expected because the meat the protagonist grills is the best. After eating just a little more, about 40 plates, he thanks the protagonist, saying that he ate very well again. Seok takes this opportunity and takes a deep breath. Doris notices this and asks if something is wrong. The protagonist says that it is nothing because he is having a problem in the kitchen, and that will probably be the last day he can serve Doris a meal. As soon as Doris hears this, he gets up angrily and asks what the problem is. Seok explains that the commander wants to eat some special magical beast meat, but those beasts are very strong and they have been fighting for days and still cannot catch them. And all the cook soldiers are being eliminated. Doris stops to think because the protagonist had said that the cook's injuries had been increasing drastically over the past few days. He asks what kind of cruel magical beast could do that. Seok says it is Mabulim, but Doris says that he has never heard of it. The protagonist laughs, saying that he certainly would not lie when his safety is at stake. Doris offers the protagonist a few more of his soldiers, however, he refuses, saying that not even 100 more incompetent soldiers would be able to catch it. But if the Great Lord Doris personally intervenes, he may be able to deal with that guy in an instant. And if that happens, the commander will also learn about Doris's achievements. As soon as Doris hears this, he already starts imagining the commander impressed, saying that now she can see that he is not a pig, but a cutie. Seok continues, saying that he currently has a good personal connection with the commander, so he will make sure to convey that achievement in a pleasant way. Doris grows thoughtful, saying that this could be a little troublesome, but ends up agreeing, telling the protagonist that he will help his friend. Seok asks if he is serious and starts laughing, thanking him for his help. The next day at the promised location, the kitchen army was already gathered, and Raquel asks the hero if he wants to memorize all of them. Seok says yes, because now he is a human navigator. Seok tells Bobo to grab those pigs, and Usaru must act according to the schedule. With everything organized, they begin walking forward. The system notifies him, saying that the promotion to battalion commander will begin. In the center of the vast forest, Doras was there with his army. Some people ask where they're going because even the battalion commander is acting strangely. His friend says that he does not know because the boss had said that they were going to hunt a powerful beast. Doris takes advantage of that, saying that the outside remains beautiful as expected. He asks the protagonist how much longer they need to walk. Seok explains that they will soon reach the correct territory. The protagonist thinks that his target is stronger than it seems, so he needs to be very careful with every move. Because Doris brought 500 soldiers from his own battalion, he is unsure whether the Nidrak will really win. Suddenly, the sound echoes through the entire forest again, and the protagonist believes that, apparently, it is slowly approaching. Doris says that now it is time for them to move. Suddenly, the huge dragon appears, and Doris asks if that is the Mabulguang. Seok says yes. Doris analyzes that monster, saying that he feels like he has seen that monster somewhere before, like an ancient beast. The protagonist says that this is normal since all animals are a little similar. Doris agrees, saying that this is truly true. Besides, a beast is a beast no matter what. He takes the lead, saying that he and the soldiers of his battalion will handle that battle. He leaps into battle, asking the protagonist to make sure to tell the commander about the achievements he is making. He uses his full charge to attack. The protagonist shouts that his movements are desperate and tells him to be careful. Doris is thrown backward and his army shouts that they cannot retreat and need to keep helping the commander. Doris turns into a ball and spins extremely fast, striking the magical beast with everything he has. Raquel is so impressed by his strength that she asks if that pig is really going to be able to eliminate that beast. Seok explains that he is using his own soldiers in a strange way because the battalion soldiers are taking all the blows in Doris's place. He thinks that this is completely different from what he had planned. Doris prepares himself again, saying that now it is time to end that fight. Suddenly, one of the subordinates comes running, shouting that another beast is coming. Doris and Seok are surprised. The protagonist thinks that this is Nidrak's territory, but another monster appears, and the small goblin shouts that they need to retreat immediately. Seok cannot believe what he is seeing. Raquel says that it is the Shirfab. The protagonist thinks that he had felt relieved because that monster is not aggressive, but it must have perceived the commotion as a territorial dispute. Doris asks everyone to retreat immediately. Raquel asks the protagonist what they should do now. The protagonist takes a deep breath, saying that this was already expected. They have no other choice but to try. He approaches his target, and Doris says that he should have investigated properly since all the beasts are gathering. Seok attacks Doris with everything he has, ordering everyone to cancel the script because there is no way to retreat and everyone needs to return as demons. The monsters continue attacking each other, and the battlefield turns into complete chaos. Doris, who was up above, starts asking where that sound is coming from, whether he was really betrayed, and whether that mysterious relationship never happened. He starts losing control, questioning how a mere human, a worm, dares to do this to him. Doris screams, consumed by his fury, and the amount of energy released is terrifying. Because of his feeling of betrayal, he was promoted to the second phase. Seok is surprised and asks what that guy is doing. Raquel tells him to run immediately. He tries to dodge the attack, but the explosion around him throws him to the side. The protagonist gets up slightly injured, thinking that he almost died, and wonders what that terrifying ability was. Doris was completely consumed by his rage, saying that he would tear the protagonist apart. Seok starts getting worried, thinking that this is dangerous, and wonders where Bobo and Usaru are. The dedicated fairy explains to the protagonist that apparently those two are trapped in the great monster's attack. Seok thinks that apparently he will have to deal with that brute by himself. The protagonist stares at his opponent and thinks that whatever ability he is using right now, it is far too exaggerated. He starts trying to run, thinking that he needs to buy a little more time. He asks Raquel to release everything she has about the monster colony that was on the map before. She starts guiding the protagonist while he runs as fast as he can. Doris was also running after him, asking if he really thought he could escape. While running, the protagonist smiles, thinking that although normal monsters avoid the strong, if they are not field bosses, if the habitat has a young individual, then the story is different. Doris remained completely irritated, saying that the protagonist is using a cheap trick with an endless horde like cockroaches. He emphasizes that he has already made up his mind because, among all people, he will certainly find a way to deal with that situation. His anger was so great that he was promoted to level 3, Falling Flowers. He shouts for the protagonist to behold that overflowing power because he truly is the strongest weapon of the demon race, and now he needs to meet his end. But suddenly, something starts happening and Doris's body becomes strange. Raquel explains that his magic is dropping drastically. Doris cannot believe that he reached his limit like that because he used too much strength to catch the demonic beast. Doris starts retreating and the protagonist asks where he is going. Doris keeps running, saying that it is frustrating, but he has no other choice. While running, he shouts for the protagonist to wait because he will have his revenge as soon as his strength recovers. Because he will never forget all the humiliation he has just gone through. While running, he thinks that if only his body would start recovering a little faster. However, the protagonist advances quickly, saying that he came as he pleased, but he will not leave as he pleases. Doris prepares for combat, saying that the protagonist is very foolish. How can he believe that he will win that fight with only his fists? But Seok gives it his all and uses the martial arts Rydran style 7th form, causing a massive impact. The two continue trying to defeat each other, but suddenly someone else approaches and is surprised to see that clash between the two of them. Hemis asks what all that commotion is in front of her castle. The energy between the two is still enormous, and a powerful explosion happens, throwing the protagonist backward. He gets up with a severe headache and questions what is happening there. Doris runs to the commander and asks her to save him because he has not lost yet, since that was not a decisive blow. But Hemis starts releasing her murderous aura, ordering him to shut his mouth immediately. She asks what kind of consolation he is supposed to be when he suffers so much at the hands of a mere human. She emphasizes that the war against humans is still happening and that, in that state of war, a useless fool like him cannot be the battalion commander of a new army. Still furious, she says that right there and now, everything will end. The protagonist advances quickly and says that he received her order and right there and now, he will capture the battalion commander. He lands another blow on Doris, driving him into the ground. The commander is surprised and smiles, saying that indeed, she did make that bet, so apparently they have a lot to talk about. They return to the castle and the two begin talking about what had happened. The protagonist explains everything and says that he had not predicted that two demons of that level would collide. Hemis starts laughing and asks what the hell is inside his head for him to come up with an idea like that. She asks if she could cut him at least once, but the protagonist simply asks for forgiveness. Hemis continues, saying that using her as an excuse for an idea was quite cunning, and although all of that is a little embarrassing, she will still consider it a true success. Seok, even frightened, is relieved to hear that. However, the commander continues, saying that there will not be a next time. If he causes trouble or uses tricks again, he should know what will happen to him. Seok thanks her for her understanding and says that he knows exactly what the consequences are if he acts the same way again. Back at the Bobo's house, he throws himself onto the floor, saying that he finally managed to survive one more day somehow. He asks the fairy what had happened to Doris. Raquel explains that from the feeling, it seemed to be a combat technique exclusive to demons, but it would be rude to ask directly. Bobo starts barking and the protagonist laughs, saying that he truly also suffered a lot because of the demonic beasts. He starts petting him, saying that apparently the commander could not get rid of them with just one bite. Seok emphasizes that he feels a little bad about everything that happened to Doris. Raquel asks who obtained all the experience points from the final blow on Doris. However, the protagonist continues saying that he is sorry and that as a human, he still feels regret. His fairy asks if he is telling the truth, but the protagonist starts laughing, saying that the truth is, he does not feel sorry at all. She notices this and tells him to lower his hands, because he is probably laughing and trying to hide it. He opens the system, asking how much his level went up. He realizes that he managed to gain quite a few levels, however. He does not know why there are squares and question marks in the skill window, and maybe it could be a mere system error. Raquel asks what kind of nonsense he is talking about. The protagonist tries to explain that he is saying there really are squares and question marks. The fairy emphasizes that the hero system cannot have errors, so she needs to know whether he is joking with her or not. But the protagonist gets irritated and tells her to leave that matter aside. Raquel grabs the glasses and tells the protagonist to stop talking nonsense, because she is going to measure his combat power to celebrate reaching level 48. He agrees because it has been quite a while since they last checked his combat level. She starts looking and says that the result is 13,936. The protagonist is impressed, saying that he really went up a lot because it felt like just yesterday that he was trembling with fear in front of a single goblin. Raquel says that she already knew this would happen, so her plan secretly prepared this. She grabs a glass of beer, saying that she wishes for his success so he should drink to celebrate. Because until the day he takes down the Demon King, her responsibility is glory and health. The protagonist continues with the endless repetition because no matter how strong the enemy is, he cannot skip that routine. And maybe after that day's training, he can go visit Miss Mariette. Raidrun arrives at the training field and says that he is arriving at the royal palace a little earlier today. The protagonist wishes his master a good morning. Raidrun says that he heard he managed to defeat Commander Doris and congratulates him. Seok is happy and thanks him. However, he emphasizes that he would like to ask something about that fight. Seok asks his master if he knows the art of Flomo. Raidrun says that it is an ancient, informal martial art. The protagonist asks how it could be informal. The commander continues explaining that martial arts are broadly divided into two forms: formal martial arts, which use body movements, and informal martial arts, which have no fixed form. Those are the two types that exist. Compared to formal martial arts, the number of informal martial arts is quite small. Although martial arts themselves are rare, informal martial arts are passed down even more secretly. Seok thinks that it is like the difference between offensive skills and enhancement-type buff skills. Raidrun continues explaining that Flomo is an ancient martial art passed down for a very long time, and anyone from the demon race who uses mana can learn it. Even so, it is an extremely dangerous skill, so few use it. The side effects are also severe. Seok is surprised, asking if he can also learn to use that kind of martial art because either way, he has a little mana. Raidrun explains that perhaps he cannot call that possessing mana because that mana became trapped inside the protagonist's body, but it is not the same thing as being his. The protagonist tries to convince his trainer, saying that nothing bad can happen to him, because even if there were some kind of accident, Mariette is still there to help. Raidrun remains a little reluctant about it since he was not sure whether it would work or not, but the protagonist gets confused, wondering why he is hesitating for so long. He decides to appeal to him and clings to Raidrun's leg, shouting that this is not fair because if he does not have that martial art, he may end up dying. He emphasizes that the commander only chooses the fights he can win and then watches with interest to see when they will die, getting irritated when they win. But his daily life is no different from that of a Legion commander. He emphasizes that it will only be once. He will try, and if it does not work, he will give up. Raidrun says that he understands and ends up agreeing, asking him to calm down and stand up. The protagonist composes himself, and Raidrun emphasizes that he feels like he was somehow deceived. Even so, a promise is still a promise, so he will immediately begin close supervision. Meanwhile, in the Sacred Empire, in the underground prison of the Great Cathedral, Orban goes there and calls Gaipin, asking if he is conscious. Gaipin looks at him and says that he was wondering who it was, but apparently it is just the Pope. He emphasizes that Orban had said they no longer had anything to do with each other. So what is the purpose of him being there? Orban says that he is offering him a special chance to surrender, because before God, there are no eternal sinners. Gaipin asks what he must do. Orban orders him to eliminate Mariette. Gaipin is a little surprised and asks why the orders change so suddenly. He cannot understand what benefits there would be for the church if the saint truly died. Orban emphasizes that he does not need to know anything. He only needs to fulfill the mission assigned to him. Gaipin points out that there is a very strong opponent inside the Black Giant, and even if he goes, it would be useless anyway. Orban tells him not to worry and says that he will assign 4 knights to him. In addition, Hemis will also be absent for a while, so this time he must succeed, because failure is not tolerated on the path of glory. Meanwhile, the protagonist was giving it his all, and his body was almost collapsing. Mariette was asking him to get out of it immediately, but the protagonist kept trying. She asked if the two of them were crazy to try that because a human could not use martial arts exclusive to demons. Raidrun, a little worried, says that the protagonist had said he was already fine because enough time had passed for there not to be that much mana left. Mariette asks if he is some kind of priest because he is not any kind of specialist, so how can he decide whether he is fine or not? She emphasizes that the treatment she had given him was to wrap and bind the mana, but the two of them had just released that mana while talking about operating it or something like that. Raidrun starts getting truly worried and asks what will happen to the protagonist. Mariette says that perhaps he cannot endure it like that. It is too late to bind the released mana again, so she needs to make his body accept that mana somehow. To do that, she needs to wrap the concentrated mana with divine power and spread it slowly. That way, she can change it into a concentration that his body can endure, like increasing resistance to poison. Raidrun is impressed and asks if that is really possible. The saint says that she does not know exactly because she has never done it and there are no precedents. There is also the possibility that the mana in his body will rebel against the divine power and become even wilder. But if it comes to the worst, either way, they have no choice but to try it. She starts releasing all of her divine power, trying to make it stop. A short time later, the protagonist wakes up in his bed, a little lost. He gets up asking what had happened because it seems like a lot had happened. Suddenly, Bobo and Raquel jump on him with everything they have, saying that he finally woke up. The fairy asks if he really does not remember anything. Seok explains that his memory cuts off after he learned Flomo and the situation is abnormal. While looking at what had happened in his status, he becomes a little surprised, asking what that is. Suddenly, Raidrun and Hemis enter the room and she smiles, saying that she had warned that he would already be awake. Seeing her, the protagonist gets up to greet the Legion's general commander. But Hemis tells him to sit down because, with that body, even crawling is probably the best he can do. She explains that Raidrun told her everything. A mere human tried to use mana. She asks why the protagonist had not told her about such an interesting matter. She emphasizes that this is the work of a saint, and he is worthy of being revered as a true saint, and it is not bad at all. The protagonist is confused and asks what that story is. Hemis keeps smiling and says that a boring conclusion is not fun, so this time, she will personally and specially help him. Seok becomes a little frightened by that, but the commander asks why he is so reluctant, emphasizing that he is her aunt and is terminally ill. Suddenly, a powerful wave of energy turns into something resembling a serpent and strikes the protagonist. The commander says that he can consider that a true honor. Seok slowly begins to lose consciousness, but the commander tells him not to worry. She tells Raidrun that Seok will be fine after sleeping and waking up later. But now they need to return to the office because the Demon King suddenly called her and has something for her to do. At the Bobo's house a few days later, Mariette tells the protagonist that day's treatment is already over. Since the magical energy incident, she has been helping him. Seok smiles and thanks her once again. She thinks that it has already been 4 days since she has been taking care of that boy, and no way, because in the end, it was his will that overcame that difficulty, because he is also the only hope she has. Seok notices that she said something and asks what it was. She changes the subject, saying that his treatment is already over, so she will leave now. But he was still thinking about the meaning of the words she had just said, because there are many things he wants to ask about what is happening in that world, because he is still a stranger in that world. But now he can only wait for the day when she tells him everything herself. Inside the royal castle, Raedrun tells the protagonist that he is only teaching him the theory of mage manipulation because the protagonist had insisted so much, but he must ask Seok not to overdo it. Seok emphasizes that everything is fine because it has already been 4 days since he ripped out his eye, because they said that the protagonist simply should not use magical or demonic energy for a while. Raedrun thinks that it has already been 4 days since the general commander left her post. The regular meeting held at the Demon King's castle is an annual event, however. This year he has a bad feeling for some reason. Seok starts shouting, calling Raedrun, because he had seen that he was lost in thought. The commander apologizes and says that he was thinking about something else for a moment. The protagonist laughs, saying that he has been very busy lately because of his duties as vice commander. For that reason, he would like to know if there is anything he can help with. Raedrun laughs and says that everything is fine because it is almost time for the commander to return. Although the summoning period is much earlier that year, there should not be much difference. For that reason, the protagonist should not worry about that kind of thing and should focus only on managing the fortress. Seok says that he understands everything and will do as he wishes. Raedrun thinks that Seok is getting stronger every day, and as the mana penetrates his body also develops. And if he stabilizes like this, he will grow infinitely. Suddenly, he senses something very strange and stands up on alert. The protagonist is surprised and asks what is happening. He grabs his spear, saying that there is another divine being inside that castle besides the saint, and it may be that someone has infiltrated the castle. He emphasizes that he will check the situation but asks the protagonist to wait there inside. Meanwhile, the 4 invaders emphasize that the invasion was easier than they thought, but they still did not know why Hemis was not there. Gapin asks them to speak more quietly because even if Hemis is not there, that castle still has another monster called the Crimson Nightmare. Suddenly, Raedrun appears in front of them, questioning how those humans know that the commander is absent. All of them prepare for battle, and one of them asks if that is the Crimson Nightmare. Gapin tries to control his companions, asking them not to panic. He asks 2 of his companions to go retrieve the saint, while he and the other one will stay there to face the Crimson Nightmare. Raedrun realizes that apparently their target is the next saint, and the room where she is being detained is not far from there. He thinks that dealing with those idiotic humans is not difficult, but dealing with the 2 of them while also preventing the others from escaping to the saint will not be easy. Suddenly, the protagonist appears, calling out to him and saying that apparently things seem serious. Raedrun gets irritated, saying that he had clearly told him not to leave that room, but then thinks that maybe he should be grateful now. He explains the situation to the protagonist, saying that those guys' target is the next saint, so he needs to take the saint and run away immediately. He throws a necklace to Seok, but the protagonist gets a little confused, asking why he has to do that with that necklace. Gaipin begins his attacks, and the commander says that the necklace is the proof he uses to gather all the high-ranking officers of the unit. The protagonist says that he understands and starts running. Gaipin asks what his companions are doing because they need to stop that bastard immediately. Raedrun says that Gaipin cannot take the saint without the commander's permission. He uses combat technique, 7th form, Crushing Strike. Raquel asks what mission the hero's doing now. The protagonist, irritated, asks how many more times he will have to explain it. The system was saying that wicked humans had come to reduce the number of innocent people. As a hero, the protagonist has the duty to protect the next saint, and maybe he does not know it, but if they overcome difficulties together, love may bloom, so he must protect the saint. In addition, if he completes the mission, he will gain 1,000 hero points. Seeing all that information, the protagonist becomes more and more confused. He opens the saint's room door all at once and says that they need to run away immediately because there is a human attack. She is surprised and asks what is happening. The protagonist says that he does not know the exact details, but it seems they are there, like last time, to take her. The 2 invaders approach the room, and the guards say that the intruders have arrived, but they must follow the commander's orders and hold those guys there. So the protagonist needs to take the saint and run away immediately. Seok grabs her by the arm, but the saint asks him to wait a minute. However, he says that they do not have a minute, lifts her into his arms, and runs away. Meanwhile, in the conference room of the Demon King's army, the 4th general of the 3rd Legion was saying that Doris really is an idiot, But no one thought he would end up falling out of Hemis's favor because who is the idiot who can be defeated by a simple inferior human? Hemis had said that he needed to restore himself while she was away. During the meeting, he says that there are no more opinions, so they can end today's meeting because they only need to follow the script. And if there is any problem, suddenly one of the goblins appears, throwing the door open and telling Commander Roiger that there is an urgent report. Roiger asks what it is. The goblin says that the human chief has Raidrun's necklace, that humans are attacking the castle, and that they are targeting the saint. Roiger gets irritated, asking what all that noise is. The protagonist finally manages to reach him with the saint, and Roiger asks him to explain in detail the report he just sent. Seok starts explaining that Raidrun sensed divine power and ran out, but it turns out the humans are trying to eliminate the saint. Roiger gets a little lost, questioning why the humans are attacking, and the saint at that. He asks the protagonist to speak a little more slowly and calm down. He notices a noise and shouts for everyone to act because they are witnessing a human attack and need to raise the fire signal. The target is the saint, and they need to protect her. Roiger thinks that this is still unbelievable because the humans are really trying to eliminate the saint. Roiger realizes that he is too far away to try to stop those two who are attacking, and maybe they might achieve their goal of eliminating the saint. But Seok activates the combat technique, Raidrun style, 7th form. He pierces through the two of them with an extremely powerful attack, saying that he will protect the saint no matter what happens. Raidrun had already eliminated one, and Gapin only says that he was a loyal friend who died so uselessly. The commander thinks that using a subordinate as a shield must not be a good thing. He emphasizes that he expected more. However, he has to admit that that boy is strong, because even considering that divine power is a natural enemy of demonic energy, Gapin must still be at the level of a division commander. This makes the commander wonder if this is the level of those revered as heroes by humans. Gapin continues laughing, saying that in the end, even the Crimson Nightmare, who made people tremble, is just another demon. Raidrun is surprised, saying that even though Gapin knows he cannot defeat him, he still remains very calm. Gapin laughs and says that is obvious, because with the real commander out of the castle, the greatest power inside that place is the Crimson Nightmare. Now, he only needs to hold him there and wait for his subordinates to deal with Mariette. Raidrun thinks that that boy is right about Hemis's absence. In addition, he also managed to discover the castle's defenses, which means information has leaked, but he does not know how far it went. He throws the other guy to the ground, saying that the conversation ends there because time is very short and they need to finish this quickly. Gapin continues acting arrogantly, asking how he's going to do that, because he knows very well that the power he possesses is completely incompatible with his. Raidrun tells him to engrave one more line into common sense and begins releasing even more of his power, creating a powerful aura around himself. Meanwhile, beside the protagonist, someone says that he had not heard that the Demon King's army had another hero. The man stands up with a sword in hand, saying that the saint, and now him too, because no one thought there would be 3 corrupted humans. The protagonist keeps his fighting stance, saying that they have already failed because soon the castle's entire force will be ready and there. So no matter how strong that guy is, he still cannot face an entire legion alone. Therefore, he does not need to waste his strength. He just needs to surrender. The man laughs, asking if he thinks it will really be like that. Roiger keeps wondering when he learned Raidrun's aura, but thanks to that, he is only acting recklessly. The invader who had been captured starts reciting that his body belongs to God, so he will sacrifice himself and return his body to the divine realm. Therefore, he must grant divine power to fight evil. Suddenly, a powerful flame begins to appear and Roiger is trapped outside because of the divine magic, because this is a spell that burns one's own body. He thinks that it is not a technique to be used while sane. Meanwhile, inside those flames, the invader explains to the protagonist that those are walls of flame hidden with the divinity of a high-ranking paladin. Most of the weak would be incinerated with just one touch, and even high-ranking outer demons cannot easily break through those flames. Therefore, the protagonist needs to hand over the saint and surrender immediately. Seok remains irritated, questioning why they are trying to eliminate another human. He emphasizes that even if he is not on the human side, the saint still is. The invader asks what kind of nonsense he is saying because, after everything that happened, how dare he say that kind of thing? Mariette tells the protagonist that this is not the case because the Sacred Empire abandoned God long ago. Seok is surprised and asks her what exactly that means. She explains that all they want is a well-behaved puppet, and it does not matter whether the puppet is truly a saint or not. The invader slams his sword against the ground, saying that this emotional melodrama ends right there. He tells the protagonist to come forward because he will give him 10 seconds for everything to end. Seok starts thinking about how long he can resist against that guy, but all he can do is one thing because only one path remains. He starts concentrating and activates Flomo, first phase. The saint gets worried about him, asking if he is really going to try using demonic energy now, because she had already said that his body would not endure it. The protagonist continues feeling absurd pain because his heart feels like it is going to explode. However, he shouts that, at this rate, the two of them are going to die anyway. He thinks that no matter what happens anymore, he needs to succeed somehow, and rises to the second phase. His body begins to collapse. He remembers Raidrun explaining that Flomo progresses in 3 stages: blooming, full bloom, and fallen petals. The fact that a single art has stages means that it is very dangerous. That is why he must not move on to the next stage until he has perfectly controlled the first stage. He thinks that he has heard that so many times that his head is full of it. Like a true demon lord, he begins releasing an intense and murderous aura, apologizing to his trainer. But he shouts that just this once he needs to overdo it again. He is taken to another dimension inside his head and emphasizes that it feels like his heart is going to explode at any moment because his body is screaming at him to stop that madness. Raquel tries to stop him, saying that he is crazy and if he continues doing that, he will not endure it because his entire body will collapse and there will be no turning back. But the protagonist closes his eyes and ears, thinking that he must not listen to anyone. His focus must be complete and absolute. He activates the final form, Fallen Petals, and his body changes drastically. He asks Raquel to apply the buff and keep going without stopping. The invader reaches the end of his countdown and sees that a human is using Flomo, which means he is not an ordinary hero. Seok concentrates and charges forward with everything he has. The invader realizes that the protagonist is already in the 3rd stage. He does not know how a human could use demonic energy, however. His strength will run out in a few minutes. So, as long as he can simply wait, victory will be his. But Seok uses a hand movement to deflect the sword with his own wrist and lands a direct blow on his opponent. The invader begins to tremble, saying that Guy uses cheap tricks and is a human fallen into corruption through demonic energy, and maybe he has no shame about any of it. Seok realizes that he is getting close to his limit, but if he collapses now, he will lose the opportunity to save the saint. He remembers his master saying that Flomo is a technique that pushes the body to its limit. If he puts pressure on himself in that state, his body will never recover again. He continues concentrating and putting more and more pressure on his own body, saying that his hair may be like that of a demon, but his tears are not, so death no longer matters to him. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. Thank you.